Oh my God.
They hold it to work.
I'm going to call this meeting to order at 6:05 p.m. We're going to start with a salute to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please join me in a moment of silent reflection. Thank you. Sunshine Law Notice. In accordance with the provisions of the Open Public Meetings Act, public meetings may be held in person or by means of communication equipment to include streaming services and other online meeting platforms. This meeting is being held through the Zoom meeting platform only, being broadcast from Borough Hall, 748 River Road, Fairhaven, New Jersey. Public participation for this special council meeting of January 9th, 2023 is available by call-in phone number or through web conference Zoom. Members of the public will be on mute until it is time for questions or comments, which will be announced. At that time, the public has the opportunity to question or comment by phone or through Zoom by the raise hand button will be called on at the appropriate time. Notice of this meeting is being called by the Fairhaven Mayor and Council. Notice of this special meeting was sent to the Asbury Park Press, the Two River Times, and the Star Ledger on January 4th, 2023. Notice was also posted on the Borough website, Facebook page, Constant Contact, the bulletin board in the municipal building, and has remained continuously posted as required under the statute. With adequate notice having been given, the Borough Clerk is directed to include the statement in the minutes of this meeting. Allison, may I please have a roll call?
Council members Cole, Hoey, here, Koch, La Barbera,
Here.
Neff, here, Rodriguez,
Here.
Administrator Casabran, Attorney Sobel, and Chief Wickover are also.
Starting with resolution 2023-40, executive session personnel. Do I have a motion?
Motion. Second.
Allison, may I please have a roll call?
Council members Hoey, here, La Barbera,
Yes.
Neff,
Yes.
Rodriguez.
Yes.
We will now be going to executive session. We will return in the public forum at approximately 7 p.m. Okay, thank you for joining us back 7:03 p.m. for the general session on Law Enforcement Appreciation Day. We are going to start with Brian Mead, who is here. He is the owner's rep for the Borough of Fairhaven. He was recently tasked with costing out 2 potential options to intervene on the current conditions of the DPW, and he is going to present the results of those options to us.
Okay. Thank you for having me this evening to share these with you and go through them a little bit so you understand the process that we went through to come up with these cost proposals, or cost estimates, I should say. So as the mayor had said, we were tasked with putting together 2 estimates. One for renovating the existing DPW building, and the second one for replacing it with a Butler style building, a pre-engineered building on that site. So let me tell you the process that we went through, and then I'll get into these a little bit. At the onset, we had met with Mr. Gardella on site, myself and my estimator. We walked through the existing facility and did pretty much assessed what was there, and the charge that we were given was to replace in kind. Okay, so if we were to do a renovation, take what's there and renovate what is there, and replacing these items in kind. And then, as I said, secondly was to replace it with a new building. So we went through that process. We came up with an initial estimate, which we shared with the administration, revised it a little bit, and then submitted it in the middle of November. At the time, we did a second review of it and did another revision and resubmitted both proposals in right before Christmas, like December 22nd. Okay, so the way we put the estimate together is using a proprietary database of costs, and that was supplemented by my estimator's relationship with vendors and also subcontractors, and also using RS means and other industry standards for estimating. So, you know, a lot goes into doing these estimates to get with accurate pricing to put together this budget for your project. So let me start with the Butler building first, okay? And I'm not going to go through this line by line, unless you have any questions, we can refer to it. But just to tell you what the scope of work would be that we priced out. So first, it would be for the new Butler building, would be demolition of the existing building that is there. So that includes the building and the footings and foundations. Okay, and then preparing for the new building, new footings and foundations. Then the pre-engineered building would be set in its place, and we're using the same footprint and the same dimensions of the existing building. So it's about 7,000 square feet. Okay, once that building is set, then we have to fit it out. Okay, so we have to put the electrical system in, we have to put the HVAC system in, we have to do the plumbing, a couple, you know, bathrooms for the staff and for the mechanics. Building out new office space to replace what is there. And then there's also a mezzanine that would be constructed, you know, separately for storage for, you know, for the mechanics and everything that you guys have in there. So it's a new building, you know, it also takes into account any of the finishes, and we have some allowances in there for equipment such as any storage racks, furniture, and then also an allowance for site work. So there's a lot of, obviously this building's not designed for either project. So we had to make some assumptions, and we had to essentially work with some allowances for certain items as well, where we wouldn't have actual quantities on what work to be done. And part of that is the site work. We know that stormwater management would have to be addressed to some extent on the site. So we allowed for that. One thing that's not in here or in either proposals, I'll tell you, is any environmental remediation for any environmental concerns. Okay, for any site work or anything within the building. Obviously, it's used as a garage. There might be, you know, issues with oil and spillage and things of that nature over the years. So any environmental concerns are not included in here. Okay. So with that, taking that scope of work, it comes up to, if you could scroll down a little bit, Nelson, I'm sorry. Okay, if you look at the first subtotal, the actual cost of the work would be just under $2.5 million. And then added into that is the general conditions for the contractor. It's all the project management, his overhead and profit. And then you'll see design contingency in there. So since this building's not designed, we have to allow a percentage in there for any creep in scope, you know, if things were to grow in scope. So there's a design contingency. And then the soft costs are assumed 20%. So that's all the architectural work, the engineering work, any attorney's fees or bonding fees, depending on how you finance the project. The bonding and insurance is the contractor's expense that gets added to that. And then given the environment that we're building in currently with inflation, we have to allow for an escalation here. So these numbers we put together in November, December, and if we make the assumption that you're going out to bid in the second quarter of 2023, we allow for a 3% increase in there. So all in all, construction costs and soft costs, we call them, comes out to about $4.4 million. And that would be for the new Butler building. Okay. Now, conversely, for renovating the building, much less scope of work. Okay. And so what that would entail is certain demolition. The exterior of the building would be removed. All the existing siding and windows would be taken off and replaced. I know the roof is an issue, which has been a, critical issue for that building right now, so it includes roof replacement. There are certain structural items which need to be assessed and possibly addressed. There's a few columns in that building. I think there's 4 of them that are questionable as far as their integrity goes. So we have an allowance for repairing those columns, and the same thing with the existing roof rafters. Just from over the years, there's some rafters there supporting the roof that are questionable and they need some repair. So we included some cost in the estimate for doing that work. So the roof would be replaced, the exterior siding would be replaced, the windows would be replaced. The overhead doors and all the man doors would be replaced as well. Then once we go inside the building, we allowed for some demolition of a portion of the slab on the, what's the concrete side? Is that the south side?
Concrete.
North side, okay, on the north side of the building, where we have a concrete slab in there. So there's currently a pit, a mechanics pit that's in there that would be taken out and filled in so that we get the slab, a flat slab, and also currently the floor drains, the floor isn't flat or even sloping to floor drains. So that would be repaired as well. There's a portion of slab that we would take out and re-pour. On the other side of the building, there is asphalt as far as the floor goes. That would be taken out and new concrete poured in its place. There is some, I'm trying to think what else as far as structural goes. We did not do any assessment of the footings or foundations. Okay, they weren't accessible, and we weren't going to do test pits or anything like that to assess those. So there's no consideration given as far as the integrity of those in this proposal. Getting into the finishes, the office part of the building, the center part of the building where Mr. Gordella's office is and the other staff members, that would essentially be gutted down to the framing members. We included in the price some additional work to make those fire rated between those offices and the garage, replacing the stairs going upstairs to the upstairs office, all new finishes, sheetrock, ceilings, lighting, flooring. In the bathrooms out of there, we just included replacement of the fixtures, no relocation of any plumbing or anything, just replacing the fixtures. So all the finishes are new. We also included getting into the mechanicals. I mentioned the plumbing. The HVAC work would be replacement of the boiler and extending piping, the hot water piping from there to the various areas of the building. The heating in the bays is currently gas fired. We would do away with the gas fired heaters and have fan coils off of the hot water heating system. We included that in the price. And then as far as the offices go, that would be split system air conditioning for those offices. So that would be some ducted split systems. And that would be in the Butler building as well. Same heating and cooling system for the offices in the Butler building. Then we get into the electrical system. I believe we're not replacing the panel in this estimate, but we do allow for expansion of it, replacing and adding breakers to it for additional circuits. In this estimate, as well as the Butler building, is a new fire alarm system included as well. Let me see what I list here. So refer to my notes quickly. New interior and exterior lighting included in both proposals. And the storage, yes, thank you. And this also includes building a mezzanine as well for additional storage along the back of the building. Then again, there's an allowance in here for stormwater management as well that would have to be addressed. So taking those things into consideration, the cost of the construction work we estimate to be about $1.75 million. And if you add in all the soft costs, which I described earlier, the grand total hard costs and soft costs is just under $3 million, $2.95 million. So you can see the cost difference between doing the two buildings. The Butler building's about 4.4, and the renovation's about 2.9 in our estimation. This does include also temporary facilities for the mechanics and for the staff by way of office trailers and other means for them to continue working on that site since they'd be displaced from the building under either of these proposals. So there is an allowance in there for that.
May I ask about time frame? How long would it take one versus the other?
I think the Butler build, I think they would both take relatively the same amount of time.
Okay.
You know, they would be constructed differently in that, you know, we make sure that we have the Butler building ready to go before we demo the existing building and, you know, and displace the workers there. So that all would be engineered and that would be released into fabrication. And once, you know, we would have a delivery date on that, then we can work the schedule backwards and start with the demolition and footings and foundations to time it so that when that building is ready, it gets set. But then we have to fit it out with all the mechanicals and all the finishes. But I think it's probably, I would say an 8 to 10 month project to do that. And as far as the renovation work goes, I would say it's probably an 8-month project, 6 to 8 months for that. So not much difference, you know, a couple months, I would say. Again, the unknown is the site work that would need to be involved and also the environmental work that would need to be performed as well, if any. You'd have to rely on the environmental consultant for that.
Based on the scope of what you're proposing here, what was discussed here, longevity of the building, Butler building versus renovation, is the same? Is one building going to last longer than the other?
The Butler building will last longer.
Can you give me an idea of years?
Well, the existing building was built in what, 1974, I think I recall. So really, you know, the frame of that building is, you know, that's not going to change. Through the renovation process, we'd be doing everything to obviously, you know, prolong that. I think everything that we would do under the renovation, as far as the exterior of the building, to preserve what's in it, you know, probably 20, 25 years. And I think the Butler building should be, you know, every bit of another, you know, 30 to 40.
Question.
Sure.
You said there was no review of the structural integrity, namely of the foundation or the footings.
Yes.
And this building was built in 1974. We both know that. How much risk is there associated with not knowing the structural integrity? And I know you didn't look at it, but that's going to impact the $2.9 million price tag if we have to do new footings or we have to do new foundational work or structural work. Is this something you'd recommend?
I would recommend that a structural engineer do an assessment of the building to determine the extent of the structural repairs so that they're known before you make a decision.
Yeah. Okay.
So, you know, like I said, like we could visually see the 4 or 5 columns that would need to be addressed. You know, we're making assumptions about the rafters based upon some visual observations, but you know, that's all easily accessible. You start digging and getting into, you know, remediation of footings, foundations, it can get expensive and it's not included in that price. So I would recommend having a structural engineer do an actual assessment before making the final decision.
What is the status of the
We
structural
have one
assessment?
proposal, we're waiting on 2 others.
And when are they anticipated?
Hopefully we'll get them within a week.
That 3% creep up of escalation for inflation,
Yes.
I wonder to what degree that's high enough of a buffer. I mean, if it's an 8 to 10 month construction, I don't know if we can still run into some supply chain issues, which now are still affecting, I think, a lot of different things.
We
Just
could, and again, that's a variable, but considering that this was, we did this estimate in, you know, through October, November, December, and this makes the assumption of, going out to bid in the second quarter of this year. It's 6 months. So I think, you know, the longer you go before going out to bid, that percentage, you know, I think can be adjusted up to make sure you're covered with it. But, you know, if you were to go out to bid second quarter of this year, I'm comfortable with the 3%.
So two things, right? So just follow up on that, right? So as of November, the annual inflation was 8.15%, right? So that 3%, right, that dollar value was as of November, December, right? And that's assuming that inflation, you covered the 3% right by quarter two.
Mhm.
Just want to qualify that, right?
Yes.
Okay,
Mhm.
cool. My second question is, so what is it in the current structure that prevents it from lasting 30 to 40 years and only 25 years if we did the renovation? What specifically is rated in the structure to say you only get another 25 years if you renovate it?
It's a wood frame structure.
Understood.
And it's already 50 years old, so
Okay.
it's just, I think it's, you know, it's just my opinion essentially.
Yeah.
As far as, you know, that's what you would get out of it. Going with a brand new steel frame building is much more longevity than a 50-year-old building built out of wood, regardless of what we wrap it in.
Right.
So it's,
And I know there's a difference between like an essential public facility versus not, right? But we have
Yes.
houses that are 100, 150 years old with the same wood timber that exists, right? So
Mhm.
everything's rated a certain way, and there would have to be additional analysis of the wood structure itself, determine if there's more longevity beyond just the 25 years.
Correct,
Okay.
correct.
I just wonder, sorry.
That's something the structural engineer will give us.
Yes.
Yes.
That's a critical piece of information that I know Teresa and Rich have been working on providing, that it'll be illuminating. Sooner we get it, the better.
Councilman Miller?
I'm just wondering if you could potentially find mold or something else when you open up, you know, the siding and everything else. That happened in my home, that
Mhm.
when they pulled out the siding, that was mold, they had to rebuild portions of the wall, the external wall. Are these things accounted for? Just wondering if we could find some surprises, you know,
Yeah.
beyond the structural issues that we talked about.
Yeah, doing a renovation, whether it's a building like this or home, it's, you're always bound to find surprises. I'll say that, again, mold or anything environmental is not included in this. However, we do have a relatively small allowance to replace the exterior, a portion of the exterior sheathing if there's any insect damage or any deterioration due to moisture. So we did take into account, you know, some replacement of the exterior sheathing. But we're, you know, always bound for some surprises. Even though the building is, you know, pretty much, you can see most of it.
Any other questions?
Brian, have you done built their buildings in the recent past?
We haven't done one done one in quite a few years, actually.
Do you know if there's much of a backlog for them along with the supply chain considerations?
I don't know, but I could find out and let you know.
And once you put down a Butler building, who designs the interior of the borough? Again, is the architect, or is the company itself generally have an architect they work with?
I think the borough would have to have an architect design the interior.
Thank you, Brian.
You're welcome. You're
Well
welcome.
done.
So if there's any other, you know, questions that come up through the course of the evening, just,
Shoot me an email.
yeah, shoot me an email, let me know. But again, thank you for having me come in and explain this, and hope it's helpful and allowing me to make a decision.
Extremely.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you, Brian.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, now I'm going to turn it over to Councilman LaBarbera. He's done a plethora of work to prepare presentations on the DPW and Police Department buildings. Goes without saying that making decisions and moving forward on those decisions to action are the priority for 2023. And with that, Councilman, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So real quick, just to kind of introduce and kind of set the framework. First, there's a tremendous amount of work contributed by not only everybody in this room, but previous governing bodies and everything. So I just want to recognize that this is not a small feat. The goal of this was to level set, and I don't have a hard time answering everybody. The goal was to level set DPW, and we'll get the police department in a second, of all the different factual information to position the council to outline what those decision points must be and make sure that we are being fiscally aware and responsible, right? When you talk the difference between renovation and new building, you talk varying costs, varying degrees, and we needed sort of a quote unquote one-stop shop of information. And we've worked over the last little bit of time to put that together. One thing that you'll see in here, and the reason that we're here tonight at a special meeting, is there is no more time due to certain life and safety requirements that are presented both at DPW and FHPD, right? And it's fact. I'm going to try and keep it to 15 to 22 minutes. So if you see me look at my watch, I'm trying to maintain that amount of window. The presentations were provided beforehand. They're going to be up on the screen, and then we'll have a Q&A afterwards as conversations come up. If I don't know it, Rich is here, Chief is here. There's plenty of people here that have been involved. If I don't know the answer, and we'll go from there. Any questions? Cool to jump in. All right. Let's go with DPW, just off the heels of Brian's presentation. See what this looks like. So I start with an executive summary, and I have an extra copy here. I can bring it up on my laptop if somebody doesn't have a copy or wants one. Okay. So we talked about the structural assessment that needs to take place, right? So it's the roof, it's the footings, and then there's 4 columns. One of those 4 columns was actually hit by a vehicle. I forget the year, it was a couple of years ago. As you heard Teresa articulate, we have 1 quote in for the structural assessment, 2 more on the way so we can make a decision. Irrespective, new construction, renovation, there's 3 critical requirements which we're going to jump into. All aligned with what we need to do from a New Jersey rehabilitation subcode, which was recently updated in the past couple of years. There's 3 major requirements. I'll discern between critical and major in a little bit. As Brian was articulating, there are what is called 5 areas of environmental concern or a recognized environmental condition that require potential mitigation depending on the extent of disturbance at the site. We'll get into them in a second. One thing I do want to call out is that the DPW has really matured over the last 5, 10, 15 years. It's really a success story, and I want to call that out because as Fairhaven's needs and essential services has grown, so has the DPW to accommodate that. When you look at DPWs are apples and oranges when you compare to other towns. It's very difficult to compare. There are some commonalities. DPWs are usually dropped in an area where there's space. This was done 50 years ago, and as the DPW's needs grow, towns find either areas to add annexes, as they call, if I'm using the right term, or they do some type of renovation to further support the essential needs. Right? I'm saying essential, not nice to have, essential. And they're in a mix of areas: residential, light industrial, take your pick. If you look at the surrounding towns. Now, if you were to shift away, not only do you need a viable location, and there was an informal assessment, by informal I mean a non-third party that looked at this and didn't find a possible area in the town, but it takes multiple years. There's site remediation involved, especially if there's those AOCs, right? Those areas of environmental concern, DEP requirements. So you could just kind of get a quick picture, and if you want to talk really more in depth of it, let me know. But it's serial. It's not concurrent things that you can do to try and get it. This has to get done first, then you can move to this step. And before you know, you're getting to multiple years of trying to get out of there. Next slide. So that's a quick executive summary. So let's dive in. So critical requirements, life and safety, right? The roof, if you haven't toured DPW, when you do, the roof is literally falling down. It's not just the shingles, it's the actual plywood. It's falling down, it's hitting the vehicles. We've all seen it with our own eyes, right? And it only takes so much logic to deduce that somebody could be walking and the roof can fall down and hit that individual. It reached its end of life in 2016, that's 6 years ago. And a structural engineer was assessed required, not only previously, but you heard that tonight from Brian Lee. Footings, there are footings in question, particularly one that kind of sparked the conversation. We're looking to have the structural engineer also assess that as well. There's no sense in renovating the building if the building can't be placed on proper footings. Life and safety, there is no proper egress. There's an office upstairs in DPW where 4 individuals work. There's no proper egress. If there was a fire, those 4 would be stuck up there. There's no windows. There's no way to get out from upstairs. That is a hard stop. You can't have that. Now, someone articulated previously, just put a fire sprinkler system in. That's not a requirement. It's a best practice, but that still doesn't satisfy the proper egress flow. Next slide. So when we get to major requirements, right? Major requirement doesn't mean life and safety. Major requirement means something that needs to be remediated in the near to mid-term. Stormwater management, you've heard that constantly, that term come up. It really boils down to two different principles. Rich, keep me honest here. It's data, not data, sorry, switching gears a little bit. It's water quantity, how much water is coming, versus water quality, how clean it is. When we talk stormwater management, we're talking water quantity. How much water is coming down and where does it go? You should have proper stormwater, not should, it is a best practice. Compliance, you heard Brian Mead articulate about that third mechanics bay. If anybody ever been to Jiffy Lube back in the day, you drive over and they work underneath your car, that's no longer allowed, it's against code. It's a fire hazard. You also heard Brian Mead articulate about the one side that needs to be repaved. He actually didn't do it justice in the sense of it's uneven. And it also, water doesn't properly flow away from that. So you can't even put a dolly in that entire section of the DPW to get under and do the work. And that's important because when it's snowing and you have to work on these vehicles, you have to have a way not only to stage them, but also be able to work on them. And you don't work on it outside while it's snowing or hailing. You got to have a viable space to do that. Space reduction, reallocation, we'll talk a little bit about police department here, but anyone know those 5 temporary storage containers outside of DPW, the big commercial containers box? It's not a best practice to have them. And it also doesn't make sense for the sign shop to be working out of one of them or having equipment to work out of one of them. So these are just different best practices. Used oil and other, vehicle fluids are also stored inside the DPW. The best practice is that it's stored outside. Certain vehicle fluids are combustible, not flammable, and there's a difference, right? And it has to do with the temperature. But nonetheless, when you say something's combustible, it explodes at a certain temperature. And I believe fire is at 1800 degrees Fahrenheit. So these are major requirements, right? Not life and safety, but requirements overall. And looking at one of these one-dimensionally, it's digestible, but when you start looking at the totality of the requirements, right? The goal again is to present all the facts so that a decision point based on fiscal awareness and responsibility can be made. Next slide. Not going to read this. This talks about those areas of concern. So back in 2017, third-party independent body came in. They found 7 AOCs, 2 of which didn't require additional work. There were 5 that require potential work, depending on the level of disturbance at the site. And they're spelled out here. Stormwater drills, there's a heating oil tank, a hydraulic lift area, hazardous material storage and handling area. We kind of already hit that one with the oil. And the floor drains, you heard Brian Mead articulate that. And there's all technical requirements that this was based on. Again, not going to dive into it. But this just goes to articulate that depending on the level of work and the level of disturbance in the site will automatically correlate to how many of these have to be addressed. And if anybody is well aware of site remediation and environmental remediation, it gets very, very, very expensive. So much so that Brian didn't put it in his cost analysis. And there's a reason for that. Because it's an unknown, it's an unknown known. Known unknown, one of those. Next slide. Just some background on the DPW. Again, where it's located, 10 full-time employees, what our essential services are that we've all gotten so very appreciative for. When the current structure was built, when this discussion began, and this is really, really important, began in 2014, which is 8 years ago, right? 2 years before the roof was supposed to be end of life. So just some context. And again, that goes back to the town council taking such a dedicated and serious approach to get this resolved and make those decisions going forward. 1 out of the 3 shared services that Fairhavens has, it has to do with construction department at Rumsden, falls underneath DPW and engineering, which falls under Reach. Next slide. Right, essential services. Here's DPW by the numbers. This is what they do. 104 roads to sweep. I'm going to read every one of these because this really puts into context of what they do. 27 miles of road to maintain, 250 catch basins to monitor, 26 centerline miles and 5,960 square feet of sidewalk to remove snow and ice. Centerline just means that a road is split into 2. So if I have 26 centerline miles, it takes 52 miles to plow it once. They use centerline mile as a standard measure when you're talking plowing. 100 acres of public open space. There's 20 distinct areas across town, 45 vehicles, 7 baseball fields. So it just kind of gives you an idea. All right, we say essential services. What does that exactly mean? And what is something that we can hang on to really understand what our DPW is doing on a daily basis. And there's 10 individuals supporting this, right? With those essential services. Next slide. Am I done on time?
It's good.
Okay, thank you. Just flag me down if I'm not. Again, not gonna read this, but again, this is a testament to the town, to Rich, to Teresa, to the crew of how the organization has evolved to meet our needs as a town, right? We're 1.6 square miles, right? We're not large. We actually have larger populations, a lot of our surrounding towns on the peninsula. I see that at the police department presentation. But all of these has turned into our essential services, right? Supporting the very fabric of what we believe in as a town. Next slide. So you heard Brian Mead articulate a lot, right, about, you know, the scope of work. At the end of the day, you need to have what the need is though, right? We can talk about all day what we want, but what do we need, right? There's a difference we have to discern. Here's the requirements of the DPW. On this slide, it also articulates and helps differentiate what's existing as of today versus what are we looking to add. And there's not much that we're looking to add. Excuse me, I'll call out here, recycling coordination office. So you talked about that mezzanine level. Adding an extra office under the mezzanine is very, very minimal in regards to cost, but we have a recycling coordinator that's dedicated to recycling. And I think we just had a resident not too long ago raise recycling in the town. Vehicle fluid outside storage, that's currently not, we talked about this, right? Flammable versus combustible and where it should be located. Life safety, proper egress from upstairs, we should have that. Public entrance, standard / best practice, depending on who you talk to. At the end of the day, you want to prevent the public, anybody from walking in and going into the maintenance bay and God forbid something happened with something. That's why when you go to, I'll pick Jiffy Lube again, they don't allow you into the actual bays, they have an area cordoned off. So just some of the requirements and some additional thing, but it needs to be mapped back to what do we need, right? And how does it support the essential services and what the DPW is charged for? Next slide. So wanted to really drive this home again, right? Because what we did was we compared Brian Mead's initial renovation, there's a lot of numbers up here, to the, he had two dates, November and December. In November, he provided initial cost for the renovation in the Butler building. Butler building is a prefab, just think of it as a new building. And then in December, he sent an updated renovation and Butler building cost. In between there were, I don't know how many conversations, Mr. Mayor, Rich, right? But a tremendous amount of discussions discerning want from need, discerning what is a phase 1 item that I have to get done versus phase 2, right? And being able to kind of discern between them. The renovation, it's a 66% reduction between the November and December cost estimates. That's great. And everybody on this like dais, the ones that were here before, should be extremely proud of that. New building was a 38% reduction. And when you look at the new building compared to the original architect, it's actually 60% reduction, right? And the purpose of this, the goal of this slide is to demonstrate how serious the town council and everybody is taking this financial purchase, right? Because it's a lot of money, right? It's a lot of money. And there's been a tremendous amount of due diligence. Like I said, we don't really have time given the life and safety requirements that exist, but it's trended in the positive direction. Next slide. This looks at the total cost comparison. So Rich and I, we sat down and we looked at Brian Mead's estimates and how those additional costs were calculated. He said design costs, right? Or design contingency. He articulated soft costs, bond and insurance. And we sat down and calculated them slightly different. Bottom line, the renovation cost came out between 2.79 million and 2.9 million. New building was between 4.1 and 4.4. But there's a few points here that I want to really highlight that are really, really important. Depending on the phasing of the project, the DPW can offset some of those costs. But you don't go into a project saying, hey, Drew LaBarbera is going to do all the demolition work and we can save ourselves $100 grand, but I'm going to take Drew LaBarbera off of maintaining fields 2, 3, and 4, right? You never want to put yourself, at the end of the day, they have essential services. However, depending on the phasing of the project, there could be additional costs that are saved. The DPW is already, right, under Rich's guidance, taking steps to alleviate the cost. They've already started demolition work. There's certain additional demolition work that they can do. They can also start to opening up walls so that when the architect comes in to really understand the full depth of what the requirement may be as far as designing. And then there's certain components that just likely might not, I'm not going to say aren't, right? I'm not going to say definitively, and there's a reason those costs are where they are, but they might not be realized. New garage bay doors, do they work today? Sure. Could we paint them and be okay with them? Sure. But should we replace them? Different question. It's discerning the need versus the want. Repaving, the HSA's column work, and even design contingency, right? Brimy did a great job of adding in those additional costs. And you never want to come in and say the project's only going to be 1.75 million and then it winds up being 2.5. There's a town not too far away. I think that was the number, 1.7 million, and it wound up being double, and they literally stopped the project dead in its tracks, right? So you rather, what's the phrase? Under promise and over deliver. Hence why you see these variations. Between the renovation new build, you're talking a 33% difference, right? So it's not as simple as saying, oh, it's only, $1.2 million more, excuse me, 1.3, $1.4 million more. That's $1.4 million that maybe can go towards PD. Or that's $1.4 million and maybe can go here, right? And this is the risk calculus, the decision calculus that has to be made. Next slide. So this is the last slide. I'm not going to go through the appendix. The appendix is all cited information that folks can read just to understand what went into the presentation. But this was the suggested milestones that kind of came out in order to decide upon. So confirm the structural engineer assessments forthcoming. I think we hit that already, which is fantastic. Thank you. Initiate, before I articulate this, the one thing that this looked to do, right, as we suggest these and as the council ultimately decides what we're going to do, was to understand, since we no longer have time due to the requirements, what can be done concurrently, vice what needs to be done serially, so we don't make a rash decision based on potential new information. So what do I mean by that? I wouldn't want to put a new roof on it today and then get the structural assessment 2 weeks from now that it's not structurally sound. However, I could put the roof out to bid to see how much it's going to cost and do that in tandem with the structural assessment. So hopefully when they come together, the structural assessment says you're good to go. All right, we're ready to go with the roof. We don't need to wait any longer. So that was initiate process to bid the new roof. This is underway. I think we heard that or articulated that earlier. We can identify the list of architects that we would want to use, depending on what direction we want to go. I did call out the fuel tanks. Help me out here. So there's fuel tanks on site at DPW. They have a certain end of life, just like a roof does, just like a refrigerator does. And the goal with fuel tanks is to replace them before you reach end of life and you come into potentially some type of issue with gasoline, whatnot, leaking out of there. We do need to have that discussion as a council here right now to understand and avoid surpassing what the end of life of those are. And then the other one is, so we talked about those AOCs, right? The areas of environmental concern. There's nothing preventing us from right now beginning the conversation. This is what they're called. They're called a licensed site remediation professional, sorry, LSRP. There's nothing preventing us from right now with having the conversation of saying, hey, if I move no dirt at the site, which of these AOCs do I need to address? Hey, if I redo the entire building, what AOCs do I need to address? And the reason that's really important to start that now concurrently to these other items, depending on the direction that we set as a team, is to develop an understanding of the extent of the work that's required on site from an environmental perspective. Because again, environmental it's so expensive. January, February, again, maintaining that momentum, and this by design is, I would say, an aggressive schedule. And if we don't hit that, that's okay, but it's to demonstrate the sense of urgency that not only we want to take, but that we're going to kind of look to maintain. Get the structural assessment. We need to know what we're doing. If the structural engineer comes back and says the footings are shot, okay, there's really nothing we can do with that. We should be able to get a list of architects that we can work with between now and the next couple of meetings. We can initiate eventually the process to do design drawings. That's why I say January, February. Now we get into some things that are serial, right? You really can't do that until some of the predecessors are Depending on what the structural assessment comes in, and because we're putting the roof out to bid, not potentially putting the roof out to bid, we might be able to make a decision quicker on the roof. Gain some economies of scale, depending if there's other roof work, which there is in town. And the DPW, again, they're assisting in this entire effort, right? They're offsetting those costs. And then there's some other swag milestones, and they're not going to get into it. I don't think it's really conducive for the conversation. But the point is that there are a series of actions we can do now currently. There are a series of actions now that have to be serially. But given the requirements that have been outlined, decisions have to be made in a, I'm going to say, somewhat time-sensitive manner. Because we don't want somebody getting hurt on site, right? God forbid there's a fire. You don't want to say, oh, we should have had egress, right? We should have moved quicker. So I'll pause there. I think I did pretty good on time.
Councilman Barbera, thank you. This is a great presentation. I'm just wondering, to the very points that you've mentioned here, that the key items that are needs, you know, and potential hazards, such as not having egress on the second floor where there are some employees there. Can the renovation address some of those issues or not? So it was.
Yes,
It was.
the renovation could address that.
Okay.
And the really important thing here, the rehabilitation subcode, right? There used to be, and help me out here, I'm going to do my best. There used to be the 25-50 rule, where the certain dollar amount of the costs for a project, they had to be under a certain dollar value of the structure, which meant you only had to commit to that piece. Well, New Jersey, specifically Department of Community Affairs that oversees all the codes, they found that there were quite a few loopholes with that. I'd redo my bathroom and maybe had aluminum wiring, but I only did the bathroom and made that Romex, right? Or, hey, I removed asbestos here, but I didn't have to go to the rest of the building because I was only touching the kitchen, right? And what the Department of Community Affairs did was they did this new rehabilitation subcode. Any building in New Jersey applies, and that's per DCA. I got on the phone with them about a week ago. And there are now 6 categories of rehabilitation: repair, renovation, alteration, I forget the other 3. But once you touch a certain space, if we went into hypothetically into DPW into Rich's office and we found aluminum wiring, we just can't replace it in his office. We then have to look at the totality of the building. So per the New Jersey rehabilitation subcode, this would be defined as a renovation. Roof is different. The roof would be considered a repair because we're going to use the similar common goods and what have you to do it. So that's where you kind of get into some of the state statutes, and depending on the type of rehabilitation dictates all the codes that the building has to be compliant for. And it's all spelled out.
So to be clear, the renovation price that we saw would include putting in those egress.
Yes,
windows.
that's code.
So those issues are addressed. Just want to make sure
Yeah.
that we.
We're not going to build it with an
That we,
egress.
is there anything that would be deficient, that would be a major hazard or major concern in the renovation compared to the Butler buildings? Or do we think that
It would have to.
the
it
issues
would-
are addressed?
No, it would have to be addressed. It wouldn't be cleared by the
They
state.
have to be
it would-
addressed.
Right. It wouldn't be cleared by the state DCA if it didn't address, major deficiencies such as egress and things of that nature, and wiring, electrical,
Okay.
panels.
Yeah, it has to.
So are we narrowing down the difference in terms of the longevity of the buildings and the structural, any potential structural issues and on, footings and so on, and environmental concerns that might be found in a renovation versus the new building?
Well, there are 5, so let's break that apart, right? So step 1 is structural. If the footings or the roof are not structure sound, or even the wood, I'm going to say the wood just to keep it simple.
Then,
Well, we have to do a new building.
right.
There's really no way around that. If the
Okay.
structural assessment comes down, then it comes down to the extent of the work that's going to impact the environmental AOCs.
Okay,
And that's why having those conversations now with the LSRP to determine the extent of the renovation, what that means for the AOCs, is going to help provide additional fidelity on what the cost is going to be. Then you get to the renovation, right? And the renovation, the components of the renovation need to be broken down with what do we need to do versus what we want to do. The wants should be a day 2, phase 2. Right, because not only is there an immediate critical need for life and safety that exists right now, right? You have the egress, right, potential structural aspects. You also have the fiscal aspect of it, right? And so as the renovation, it won't be a punch list at this point, but the renovation scope of work is discerned and looked at. It should be, hey, we need this. Hey, we want this. Hey, are the 5 garage bay doors operational? Yes. Are they the prettiest? No. Can we put some paint on them? Sure. So we don't need to spend 75K on new doors. We can spend 5K on paint. I'm not saying I'm picking something arbitrarily, right? But that's the analysis that has to be conducted. And that's where we get into what we can do serially versus what we can do concurrently.
And sorry about this is my question, just in terms of the Butler building versus the renovation, I understand that we want to get just what we need as a starting point, but does the Butler building right off the bat offer additional benefits in terms of the way it's, the way it might be designed, the way, the position of the offices or the different implications? Are there some clear advantages or not to the Butler building in terms of meeting the needs versus the
Both-
renovation, leaving it to be desired?
Both estimates, renovation, new building, same programming,
Mhm.
same garage space,
Same
same
needs.
office.
So it's
space.
meeting the needs that we are discussing.
Yes.
Let me just throw in there, it sounds like we could get additional programming from a Butler building, but it would increase the cost.
Yeah.
So the current
No,
estimates
it's
are
fine.
based on the same.
So I just want to get a feel of like, what is it that we are, where are the real differences and where they are offering similar benefits?
Some of the difference in the costs, even if you were to renovate your own home, if you're gonna renovate a bathroom, you're not moving plumbing, you're not moving all the plumbing and electrical. So there's a lot of cost savings with the renovation as it relates to, as Mr. Reed said, the bathrooms are staying where they are. We're simply replacing a toilet, the sink, and putting in new sheetrock, lighting, and exhaust fan and flooring, and some HVAC, where when you build new, you're basically gonna take everything, excavate, remove everything, put everything in a dumpster, haul it off out of town, start with a fresh piece of land, and then you gotta run in your electrical, your plumbing, your sewer. Those are big numbers when it starts adding up. We're able to reutilize the electric panels. They've been replaced since '74. They've been updated. The boiler's 24 years old. It needs to be replaced, but the existing infrastructure off the boiler in many cases is salvageable. So you don't need to run all new copper piping to every space within the building. You simply need to expand upon that boiler system, as he had mentioned, to service some of the other areas within the building that don't have heat. So things of that nature.
Also get away from the combustible. I forget what the
Yeah, the
open
gas
flame,
fire,
right, gas fire.
Half
which
the
actually-
garage bays have a gas fire heating system, so you essentially have almost an open flame, in that bay area, which is not practical. So we could simply branch off the boiler system, which is very efficient for the other bays, and simply put that in the other 3 bays. Hitting upon the wants and the needs, yes, life safety, but there's other examples of things that the borough can do to increase life safety, and those are decisions that we would have to make with the architect or some of the other professionals. For example, do we fire sprinkler the building? It's not a requirement, but it's an option. That option can cost $100,000. So that's when you need to really, once we start digging into this and make a decision on what path we go, then you could start looking at some of those extras. I wouldn't necessarily classify that as a want or a need, but to the point of the slide that Drew had up, Councilman Drew had up in the presentation, I think there are only 4 additional things. We're looking at incorporating the storage. The storage is the biggest challenge, and we've all been talking about this for a while. And trying to eliminate those 5 containers that are on site in a residential neighborhood and incorporating that into that building.
So one of them is the sign shop. One of them is storing equipment, and you want to usually store equipment in a garage setting. If you call any DPW local area, right? A couple of them are for PD, which with the PD, we would actually get rid of them. So you'd remove them, because if the site's not going to move, how do you make it more residentially conducive? I'll use that word. And by removing storage, commercial storage containers, that's one of many things that you can do to make it more residentially friendly.
And the only other thing I want to clarify is we had mentioned there was an estimate that was done in draft form in November, and then the estimate that came out in December. And Drew had shown the comparison of the cost difference
I
for
think
both.
it's 10 houses.
And there is substantial savings from the December one. The reason being is, as Brian Mead had mentioned, he was tasked to provide an estimate as is, but he doesn't have architectural plans. He doesn't have all the programming in place. So we got the initial numbers. We then brought Brian back into the facility. Obviously, some of you folks came over as well. We worked through that to try to chisel that down to a more realistic approach, and those are the figures that are shown.
And in some ways shows the delay on getting information from us over time. You're welcome.
And I'll just make a last comment, and I think that's a final step on the game, once we make the decision where we're going, on what we're doing, but we really should think about beautification of the area. Those gates, when you drive by, you can see those trucks inside. And I think that that's something we need to take into consideration, you know, this decision, the big numbers are here on what we're discussing, but I think we should also keep that in mind, you know, ways that we can ensure that those doors are gonna be closed, so that people living there are not always seeing the trucks, whether it be trees or whatever it is that we want to plant and what is that we want to do. But I think we should keep that bigger objective, which I think was part of the plan discussed in the last few years. And we should really keep that in mind as, you know, the final touch we want to give to whatever it is that we decide.
Those items that you talk about are not included in the estimates.
Right, that's exactly what I'm
They showed up
mentioning.
initially and inflated the cost substantially, so
Yeah.
we scaled back.
Yeah, and I'm not talking about anything crazy, but I'm just saying, you know, maybe there are things that we can do to beautify the area around it without substantially adding to the cost, but it's something that, from a community perspective, I think is important for people living in that area.
I totally agree, and I would fall back though also on what Councilman LaBarbera said, which is they don't necessarily need to be day one.
No, that's
Let's,
fine.
yeah, but I do agree that there's ways to improve the area. So, Councilman Rodriguez.
I echo the, thank you for the presentation. Councilwoman Sorensen's in the audience. She was here in 2014, 2017. We've been doing this a long time. I do think that what you pointed out in terms of the time is over and there's a sense of urgency. I think we've got enough under our belt to get this done, whether it's a renovation. I'm somewhat skeptical only because we have no idea what the structural integrity of the footings and the foundation are, but assuming those are okay, understanding what the structure can handle, because it wasn't engineered for what we're talking about. And I don't know if it can withstand a renovation or not. So we'll learn a lot along the way, but I think we need to take some action. So I support your recommendations. I'd like to move as quickly as possible to get our employees into a safer environment and get something appropriate for our community.
Yes, I want to thank you very much, not just for the presentation, but for the research that went into this. It's very fact-based. It's driven by real information that frankly, to me, identifies areas of concern from third-party reports that identify what has to be done. Some of it we can see with our own eyes, right? But some of it has just been deferred maintenance over time, but it's documented. And I really appreciate you pulling it all together, put it in one place and give us the ability to make real decisions, because good decisions are based on good information. The other thing I just wanted to put a frame around is not only have you distilled all the information and provided the facts for us, particularly about what is essential and needed, to me, they're almost repairs and improvements. And I know the subcode identifies it as a renovation, but repairs and improvements help me think about, you know, provided there's a structural evaluation that gives us the ability to move forward. You've identified an envelope of must-dos that makes sense.
Right.
And we can, there's a number attached to it, so we can set a budget. We can set a budget, and then if we want to exceed it, for example, because I agree with Councilor Neff, and what Mayor said, I've long been an advocate for these two, the DPW operation, the residential neighborhood, this is a use conflict, just from a daily life perspective. And any steps we can take, whether it's through buffer or different kinds of fencing and things like that, when we do decide to move forward and perhaps in that serial manner, address it, that's something that, to me, I would think would be worth a little attention and some investment. So, but we'll know where we're deviating from budget or where we are adding to the cost, the project. And whether or not we can make a value decision then, because the envelope has been set. So I just really want to thank you for gathering all this, getting it all in one place. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councilwoman.
I
Councilwoman Lloyd.
echo everything Councilwoman Cole just said, and I thank you numerous times. You've done an excellent job on this. Thank you. I just want to confirm what you need from us tonight. So
Thank
do
you.
you mind pulling up slide 12? Allison? So we already have the structural engineer. We're waiting. We're Teresa leaving within a week.
Yes, and what we talked about earlier today, generally speaking, the cost for the structural engineer will not be excessive. And in the interest of time, with the governing body's approval, once we get the proposals, I can issue a purchase order based on the recommendations of the facilities committee prior to it going on a governing body agenda.
I'd like to see the proposals.
Okay. After that, do you want to come back to council or can we make the decision there?
I don't know, that's just my position. I want to see them.
Copy that.
And then the rest, like the other 4 things, initiating the process to bid. Is it all we're going to vote on this now?
Yeah,
right?
roof bid's underway. We would have to get a short list of architects that could do the renovation indoor Butler building.
Yeah.
Sync up with or start the process, and I'm going to defer to Richard Cruz on this, and engage with the LSRP, the licensed remediation professional. And then I don't know what information we'd share on the fuel tanks to begin that discussion. When do they reach their end of life? Do you know the actual date?
We've had numerous issues with them in the last few years.
Check.
The pump system is antiquated, the motherboard's fried, we can't get parts, we're in a manual mode right now. We had another failure a week and a half ago. We've already reached out to state contract vendors, we're getting pricing and design submitted. We've got some initial design done and costs, we're just waiting for final numbers.
Perfect.
Quick question on that, if I could, just a small technical question. The state contract would provide an estimate for the installation of new fuel pumps, is that correct?
It would be new fuel pumps and the fueling computer system that goes, the fob key system that goes with it.
Second part of my question, would that allow us to monitor fuel consumption per vehicle?
Yes, just like we used to,
Great.
10 years ago, we used to run
Thank
monthly
you.
reports. Yeah.
The state contract allows us to purchase them without going out to bid because the state's already bid.
Gotcha.
And we're working with a firm that kind of does a design build type
Okay,
hybrid, so they brought in some engineers as well to ensure that rules have changed, so there's some compliance things that we need to deal with.
one last question, if I may. When will we have that information?
We met with them right before Christmas. They had some staff being on vacation, between Christmas and New Year's. They were going to circle back with us first 2 weeks of January, so any day.
We should circle back with them, right?
I
Yeah,
think so,
because our next meeting is
We need
23 January.
yeah.
And on the roof, we're waiting, we need a second quote from a vendor that would actually come in and do the assessment and the design. Rich can sign the bid specs as an engineer, because a lot of these roofing companies don't have one, but it doesn't change the fact that it's over the quote threshold, so we'll do a second quote.
So we're not actually voting on anything tonight, correct?
Just a background, back in 14,
Right, the
I
17.
we contracted out with a roofing consultant to do the design services for the DPW roof and the roof over the administrative offices, which is the lower roof at Borough Hall, this building. We shelved it for obvious reasons, because everything was kind of in a holding pattern. That company that did the consulting for us has since gone out of, not gone out of business. The
Acquired.
president retired, and I've reached out to the company that took over those services. Many of the staff still work there. The one guy that I actually dealt with is still there. I sent him an email. I sent them everything we had. They said, Rich, we would love to work with you on this. They submitted, as Teresa had mentioned, a revised proposal because once again, some of the codes have changed, but more importantly, the integrity of that roof structure has changed. So there's areas of that roof that we may have to replace some more of the sub things of that nature. So those documents need to be updated. Those are the figures we were getting because of the New Jersey laws. We have to get a second quote.
And those were shared with the facilities committee. just like everybody.
So this week I'll reach out to maybe second or third roofing consulting firm and hopefully get some numbers back.
It just came in today. We'll get them out.
I'd like to see
Yeah,
that.
and then there is an economies of scale by pairing the DPW roof with, I'm gonna call it the lower roof on Borough.
There is, so I spoke with the president of the one company to see if there was an economy of scale to do both facilities, because obviously, we also have a need here. We've got active leaks at Borough Hall that we've been dealing with. There is a slight economy of scale, I think, obviously, because those two sites are in close proximity. If you get one bidder, they did recommend to break it out so you can actually see what that cost savings is.
Cool.
And there's ways to do that in the bidding process.
So we'll get the roof bids
Mhm.
to the council for review, the structural assessment proposals for review, list of architects, engagement with the LSRP, and the fuel tanks pricing designed by the 23rd.
Yeah, we
Fantastic.
should have all that.
All right, great. Yeah.
If I may just make one last comment, I think we're just, it's good to bring it back to how much it's gonna cost residents to make these renovations, and, granted, we have already said that the budget this year will not be easy because of all the inflationary challenges we have that we're dealing with, and we also have the police department building to deal with. But, I know that the difference of what we've seen so far between the renovation and the Butler building is a 33% increase according to your numbers. But it's about $1 million, right?
1.4,
1.4.
and according to Brian Mead's numbers, okay.
1.4 million. So, when you divide that by 2,000 homes, what is that, $600? I know that we're gonna issue a bond and we're gonna pay it over 30 years, but just to keep it in context, I mean, I think I would go and say that $1 million is not a huge amount of money for the borough, and for when you divide it by the town, by the number of homes in town, and over a 30-year period of time, if that's how the way it's gonna be paid out. Now, I'm not in favor of one or the other. I think both are good, but I just think we should just keep in mind that the difference
Yeah.
from a residential home perspective doesn't seem that large, and I'm not clear that the renovation, after whatever we might find behind it, once we start doing it, might not bring us to some surprises beyond the Butler building. So I just wanted to make sure that we bring it back to the finances, because, we want to be financially responsive,
Yep.
Responsible, but at the same time, at least from my perspective, my initial reaction is that the difference is not as substantial by household. And maybe you might disagree with that. So I just wanted to make sure that we're thinking in those terms as well.
That's fair.
Well, on a
What- what
related
are we-
note, I think the other thing you need to keep in mind is when, and this is something that, I've copied finance committee on, when bond counsel actually looks at going out to sell a bond, what they do is they take the asset, and you can only sell the bond over the life of the asset. So on a renovation, the life of the asset might be 20 years. On a new building, it's 30. So it's gonna affect your debt service schedule over time. And you have to ask yourself, whether spreading it over a longer period of time is more financially beneficial, and that's something that your financial advisors will help you with.
That's one of the things I was going to ask, if Councilman Mayor agree that when we're ready, because we're reaching a state of readiness. And I believe it, at least for me, because I don't have a finance background as some of you do, but it would be helpful to bring in our financial advisor and our bond counsel. and they will have already done some homework for us, so we can look at what the options are and also perhaps get some advice and some discussion.
Why don't we go ahead and based on the two numbers, get an analysis of what that would look like?
You might want to include the PD as part of the whole.
Sure,
overall analysis.
absolutely.
Yeah, I would agree. That's a great idea.
So I mean, we don't want to make an. isolated
Together, but
decision,
separate.
right?
Yep.
But we might end up in the same place, potentially end up in, we're very close to it. And then, it might help us making this decision between one or the other.
But we're gonna continue with what we have, right?
Yeah, I'm just adding the financial advisor piece to the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 items we have before.
Anything we need to do in the Butler building, parallel process, to your point? No, nothing. Okay.
Well, I do think it might impact your LSRP, because if you're gonna demo a building, you probably disturb more soil. Niche.
The structural engineer and LSRP are kind of
Okay, one-on-one.
really,
Yeah.
really critical.
And the borough did have an LSRP originally, and we changed last year, and, that's up to the governing body whether you want to look at other LSRP options for different engineering firms. We did appoint a new engineer this year, so we could look at that.
What's needed in order for us to be able to reach out to an LSRP between now and 23 January to initiate the
Or you have
discussion?
to use the one you currently have.
Are we okay with that, with initiating that conversation?
You're gonna get charged for every minute you talk to your engineering firm. So I'm not saying that you don't want to reach out to them. I'm thinking you want to do it in such a manner that you can limit the scope of work and talk about what we're actually looking for them to do for us. We don't need another 85-page report.
I would maybe take a look at the prior proposals to see what the scope of work is for each. Because we kind of halted everything, knowing that we were at a crossroads. So they stopped work. There was some, obviously the phase 1 and all the AOCs were determined. And then the second LSRP, which is a different consulting firm, was brought in. And then we also have, I'm sure you'll mention as part of the police facility, we've got a potential oil tank or fuel tank there to deal with. So there was a third proposal, I believe, or, I'm not sure on the number of proposals, but there is some groundwork that was set. Maybe Teresa and I, we can go back and take a look at those and see where we are in that before, like she said, before we kind of set the reset button on this.
I mean, the question for me is, what does the mitigation thresholds look like for the 5 AOCs, depending on renovation versus new build, right? I mean, that's ultimately the answer we're looking for. However,
It's driven by scope of work.
exactly.
So we know kind of where our scope of work is. We've got 2 alternates, we've got 2 options.
Mhm.
So
And then therefore the LSRP would be able to make a determination or some initial assessment based on these 2 scope of works. These 5 AOCs would have to be mitigated completely, or these 2 out of 5 would have to be mitigated completely. Right? I'm not looking for a 1,200-page report like the initial phase 1 is, but a 1-page or 2 or 3 paragraphs on initial
with the
assessment.
recommendations.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because that would then inform us on the 23rd. That'll help us make a decision. Okay, we got to initiate phase 2 on 1 and 2 because the structural assessment came back. We're going to renovate, make it something up hypothetically, right? But that's the data point that we need.
I agree.
All right, we are going to move along now to the Fairhaven Police Department presentation. When that's complete, I'm worried we won't get to PD. So let's move to Police Department. We'll then go to council questions on that, and then we'll open it up to the public on both.
Okay.
Get going.
You sure?
Yeah, I've seen it.
Okay, all right. Is everybody all right out there? We good? All right, let's keep it going. So, police department, chief, again, the thanks extends to chief and the amount of work and phone calls day and night that I called him to run down factual information. So I appreciate everything that chief and Rich, thanks for the help on this. So executive summary, right? So it's gonna be a similar format, right? Second facility building. There's 2 health and safety critical requirements. We'll get into them. Pair with 1 major. You'll see a theme here with how the facts were derived. At the end of the day, we either need to renovate or build new, and we'll talk about that a little bit. The decision to renovate or build new, it comes down to the cost analysis, If the longevity, we already talked about the longevity, we kind of went through what the analysis is, of whether or not you're gonna renovate or do a new building. And really, at the end of the day, whatever we do should support future scalability. And we'll talk about that in a minute. What I mean by scalability is if the police force were to grow, right? You can't build it for what it is as of today. You do have to have some balance to make sure that it's scalable for some future use. When we look at data, and we'll talk about what that data is, and this was updated. This is the second version. So if you had an old version, we did revise the data. Data supports the construction of a 4,990 square foot police department. Not saying that's what it should be. I'm just saying what the data tells us. If you look in 2021, the average cost of a medical center, right, which would be Aviant, I think was what it was called, back behind the old gas station. It's around 720 a square. I took 499 square feet. I adjusted the 720 square foot for 8.15% inflation, which was the annual inflation rate as of November. And that would mean a 4,990 square foot police department costs around 3.8, 3.9 million. Does not include site work, right? As you heard, site work can be either really expensive or really expensive. The current design plan that exists, it's a 7,000 square foot PD. It's 8,500 square feet total. Some redesign is likely because the ADA codes are being updated in March of 2023. And that's really, really important to call out because even though you have a police department maybe 15, 20 years ago, that's 5,000 square feet, it would be bigger today because of ADA compliance. And I don't have all of it, I have some of it. And that's being in March 2023. Next slide. So what's critical requirement one? Mold. You've heard about this. I was in the police department 20, 25 minutes. I was coughing. There's a mold issue. It requires immediate attention, not midterm, not 3As, like immediate. Per the EPA, and this is really important, fact, mold can grow or fill in empty spaces and crevices of porous materials. It's really important to call out. The EPA and CDC stress the importance of stopping the source of mold growth and ensuring the building is dried out appropriately before. The EPA also articulates that mold may be difficult or impossible to remove completely. Now, a complete assessment, which is really, what's the word I'm looking for? Extensive and likely not needed, would require to determine the full extent. But you got to remember, mold's been growing here since 2016, I think. And I give examples of porous materials. Concrete is porous, right? Per definition of EPA. And there's some other components there. I call them out because you have drywall, you have ceiling, you have carpeting, you have acoustic ceiling tiles. All of those grow mold and they got to be removed completely. Mold remediation, we talked about the rehabilitation subcode, right? This would be renovation work because it requires demo work in order to remove it. And there's separate subcodes and I call them out there in the presentation. But this is, if anybody's curious about impacts of mold and what it can do to you, the NIOSH, which is in your appendix, it articulates it, talks about the significance of mold and what it can do. And you don't feel it now, you feel it years from now. Next slide. Number two, safety. So when you detain a suspect, you have to have positive control of that suspect. What that means is when they get put in the back of that police car in handcuffs, how they are processed and transferred has to be in a secure environment at all times. A police car, by definition, is a secure, positive control environment. They're in handcuffs and then they're in the cage and everything in the back. Right now, the police department does not flow that way. This building was converted back in the 80s, right? Its initial intent was not a police department. So when you look at the flow of a suspect, it goes between secure and non-secure, and that's a problem. Proper security separations between the ops area and public are necessary. This is per the IACP. The IACP is an organization of 170 countries, 32,000 members, and was established in 1993. And they provide kind of the best practices / guidelines of how you want to establish a police department. If we were to redesign Fisk right now, it would require what's called an alteration. And that's also complex because you have to bring the structure up to a certain grade because it's what's called an essential public building versus a non-essential public building. Your houses are non-essential public buildings. They have different codes. If you have an essential public building, it has different codes per the rehabilitation subcode. Alterations are very, very difficult, not impossible, just very, very difficult. Next slide. Major requirements. So again, right, critical is like life and safety. Major is we need to do something. The Department of Corrections came on site in 28 April 2022, and they looked at the police department. Our cells, our holding room and processing room in Sally Port are not up to standard. One, we don't have a Sally Port, and I'll talk about in a second. Our cells, which we have 2 of, are not up to the construction code for the New Jersey state statute. And our holding room and processing room is not up to code per the state statute. It's chapter 34 of the Department of Corrections handbook. A Sally Port is really confusing. At the end of the day, right, we talked about a secured area, positive control of the suspect. So that means if I had a vehicle, I can go into a double gated, I believe chief, double gated enclosement and then transfer them inside police department as long as there's no way to get out. That's secure. I could have a garage where the garage opens, I take the car in, the door closes, I take the suspect out, and I transfer them in operational areas that are secure. There's also components that aren't up to compliance. There's no female locker room. You have to have a female locker room. And the entire building doesn't adhere to current ADA compliance guidelines. And not to mention in March, right, it won't even further. The Department of Justice also has guidelines on various components of a police department. HVAC, camera system, interview, I'm not gonna read them all. Ours are outdated compared to the guidelines, right? So when you compare, that doesn't mean that they're not working. Just means they're outdated, right? There's a big difference, right? The police are doing what they got to do every day. Chief does a great job of that. So I'm not trying to have a chaos moment here. But when you look at the mold, you look at the transfer of suspect, you look at these major requirements based on DOC, DOJ, right? ADA compliance, it helps paint the whole picture to inform the decision of whether or not you're going to renovate or do a new building. Next slide. Going to speak somewhat at high level out of this just to be sensitive to the information, okay? But there were a series of prior safety incidences that have occurred at PD. And depending on how the building was structured up to the standard, likely would have had a different outcome. So there was an officer one time injured in the cell area while securing a suspect, couldn't go back to work. One time a suspect escaped. Suspects have a resisted arrest in the parking lot. That's a problem, right? Because you have the community fields, the residential area. Suspect fell down the stairs once, right? There's 2 flights of stairs. So you have to go up in the PD. And this is the span over multiple years, right? But when you walk upstairs, you have 2 flights of stairs. And then one suspect very cleverly escaped the processing room. Now, this isn't to splash paint in anybody's face. This isn't to sound an alarm. This is to articulate and help quantify the risks that exist, right? Because these have become issues, but there's still risks present because things aren't up to a certain standard or certain code, right? I'm not saying that this would have been 100% avoided, right? But the outcome likely would have been different. Next slide. Just some numbers just to educate everybody, right? Fisk was built in the 1900s. I've heard early 1900s. I've heard 1930s, early 1900s. 1912, Fairhaven becomes a borough. 63, we get our own police department. We believe prior to that, we were state police driven. Not 100% sure on that, don't know. If you're a small enough town, the actual, or police department, the state police will actually govern your town. We don't qualify for that, just so everyone's aware. 1983, Fisk Street becomes the PD. We took a building with its intent for something not to be PD and converted it. And then in 85 is when the police department maintained 13 officers. Now, one thing, and this is a huge testament, and it's really, really important to call out when you talk about like the culture of the police department, when you talk about success, right? Because Chief's done a phenomenal job, right? Everybody that supported Chief over the years did a phenomenal job, including those up here. Our police department has so many other experiential responsibilities that they don't have to do, but that they sign up for, right? And that's some of the benefit you get here when you have a town like we do. A rapid deployment force, that's SWAT. 3 officers are part of county SWAT. That's really good. Negotiator, one of our officers is a negotiator, can work with county and state, really important. Active shooter cadre, we all know how critical active shooter is. It's horrible we have to say that now in today's day, but whatever, it is what it is. We're part of that, and Chief leads it from Monmouth County. Another thing is we engage in a ton of state initiatives, and it's really important to call out. The most one that I think is fantastic is most folks don't know there's a prescription drop-off box inside the PD where you can bring your unused pills and whatnot and put it in there, right? So this really it just demonstrates how the PD, we're not just the police department, right? Not only is the police department, not to be cliche, it's a family, not do they know our kids who are going to school and they know the residents, but they go above and beyond being out there on the street. They do all these extracurricular activities, right? And again, not to hit it again, but Chief, that's a testament to the culture that you've established. Next slide, please. So I'm a data guy. So I like to look at numbers. So when you look at all the census data in our surrounding towns, Fairhaven's what's known as a 2-officer minimum. Chief, that means at any time, 2 officers have to be on duty.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. So all the towns on the left are other 2-officer minimum towns. Rumson, Little Silver, Highlands, et cetera, et cetera. What we then did was we then looked at different variables across these towns, land area and square miles. I care about land. I don't care about water, right? We don't have a Coast Guard. So we want to separate out how many square miles of water exists for the town. Really doesn't apply. Our population, our number of households, our number of school students, the number of police officers, and the square footage of the current police departments in those towns. Now remember, a lot of these police departments were built previously. So they're not up to current ADA compliance. What does that mean? That means that these police departments, as of today, they're satisfying what the need may be. Whether or not they could support future scalability is a question mark. We haven't walked through them, but they support the needs as of today, but they would be bigger because of ADA compliance rules, right? And that's really important to discern there. So when you look at some of the averages here, Fairhaven's average population is 6269. The average of our surrounding towns is about 5,000. Fairhaven has around 2,038 households. That does not include commercial buildings. The US Census data specifically calls out residents, so I did not include businesses in there. The average is around 1962. Fairhaven has about 1,000 students. That's Millwood, Sickles. That's not RFH, right, Chief? The average in the surrounding town is 529, so we're significantly higher. And it gives you an idea of number of officers. The average is around 14.78. We have 13. And then the average square foot. So this is where I want to spend a little time. Ocean Port's building really isn't a good value. They acquired a building, they converted it into police department. If I included Ocean Port's number, you get a 5,546 square feet. That's the average size of the police department with 2-officer minimums. When you remove that 10,000 square foot and you average out the remainder, that's where you get that 4,990 square foot. If you remember the original number that I articulated, what's really important to call out there though, these buildings that are older would be bigger because of ADA compliance. How much and whatnot, I don't know, because I wasn't able to go through these and figure out what they are as of today. But it's really important to call out how ADA compliance should impact these buildings to make them more accessible for all of our residents. Next slide, please. Let me just make sure I hit. We talked about what it, yeah, hang on one second. Okay. Just some data. This is left side is census data from the 80s to 22. Our last census was 22. There were some estimated values out there, and it's cited in the appendices. You'll be able to pull it up. And this is the number of calls throughout the years from 2012. That's when we converted to county dispatch.
Yes, it's still in the system.
Yep. Now, what these calls don't include, Chief is well aware and is fixing it, is sometimes residents will call into the PD and leave a voicemail. Hey, my cat's out, I need help. Hey, X happened. Hey, Y happened. Right? That doesn't go through the funneled system, is not calculated here. Chief's well aware, he's working on it, he'll fix it. But it's really, really important. 2012 is when the system was implemented, so there was only, I extrapolated the data. We have 1 quarter pretty much, a little less, multiplied by 4. So just some data just to give some feedback, right? Some fidelity. Next slide. So again, needs versus wants. What does the police department need? What are our requirements? And here it is. Left-hand side, the green check mark shows everything the current building does have. These are the things we have. The X is what we don't have. Don't have an interview room. That's the standard to have an interview room. We don't have male and female locker rooms. You need to have male and female locker rooms. It's not fully ADA compliant. It needs to be ADA compliant. We don't have a Sally port. You need a Sally port, right? So it just kind of provides the data points that the council's going to need to justify the size of the building, to justify what we're going to do a renovation, try and alter the current footprint to get more out of it or not. But this is the program requirements. And again, IACP, right, which is that 170 country member organization, Department of Justice guidelines, Department of Corrections, state statutes, and aligned with the essential needs of the police department for Fairhaven. Next slide. Okay, on time. Okay. So can you scroll down just a little bit? Perfect. So here's some design analysis. So I want to provide some feedback not feedback. I want to provide some level setting here. Love that word. So the initial goals behind here was to enable the existing police building while construction happens. And the reason that's important, I believe the number to have a mobile police station is like $500 to $600 a year, right? They literally bring in these trailers that are meant to serve as a police department, right? So you're talking potentially $1 to $1.2 million to store. So that was one of the reasons behind the current design analysis. Accommodate parking, right? Parking for the police department, parking for the fields, maintaining setbacks, which is really important when you get into planning and zoning. Rich can go into that if anybody has questions on that. And then allow the pathway between the street and the community center to exist, right? Somebody ever walked on Fisk and you can walk through, right? You got the basketball courts there and then you can get to the fields. That was kind of the goals in mind here that helped with the design. It gets into the current architectural drawings. It talks about what the current base bid, there is a detached building for police and I believe the community center. There's a variety of deducements made. I'm not going to go into this. But the one important point, and Rich called it out earlier, is this last bullet, and this is why we need to get the LSRP involved, is there is an underground tank that currently exists there. So that will have to be removed. And that's that. Okay, next slide. So here's some proposed solutions, and I want to talk a little bit about this. So if we just step back and just look at what is possible, and doing nothing is not possible, that's purposely not included there, okay? You can renovate the existing facility, it's possible. You can acquire, adapt another existing building. This is all possible. I'm going to help qualify this in a second. You can construct a new facility at Fisk, construct a new facility somewhere else, or you can construct a new facility combined with other borough facilities. So there's a couple different components here we have to remember, right? Essential public building versus non-essential. So what that means is if we were to acquire and adapt another existing building, we would have to convert that to an essential public service criteria standard. It's extremely costly. There's a whole list of standards that you have to meet to include structurally of the, and that's per the rebuild district subcode. You can look it up. We can renovate. Renovation presents some challenges that the town council will have to ultimately decide of if we can alterate that building, if we can bring up certain structural components where it needs to go. Construct a brand new facility there. A new facility, a different location. Well, we kind of got where we are today because we converted a building and changed its intent, right? The intent is really, really important when you look at the purpose of a building. It will tell you whether or not it's going to be industrial use. It will tell you not whether it's going to be Class B office space. The cells are industrial use, but the rest of the PD is Class B use, I believe. You can construct a new facility, come out with other borough facilities. If you look at the research of the last 3 to 5 years of what we've done on this, meaning Fairhaven, it's not conducive, it's not cost effective, it doesn't make sense. We're not Middletown and need this huge facility. So potential next steps would be confirming 2, 4, and 5 are not viable, potentially get cost estimates from 1 and 3, and get the cost analysis and move forward. Next slide. And again, I'm not going to go over the appendices, that's where all the supporting documentation is. But when we look at this, we have a decision to make as a council, right? We have to move forward between the critical requirements, the major requirements, everything that's outdated, we can no longer wait. Whatever needs to happen between the drawings that exists and bifurcation to get next redesign steps, we have to make that decision. We have to give clear direction to finish this design, if that includes at the community center, whatever that looks like, to work towards bidding a project. Some lead times here, design, redesign on average takes 6 weeks. That's the general lead time for that to happen. Normally it takes just as much time for review. So you're talking 12 weeks, 3 months. And that's really important number to call out because most builders won't break ground in the winter because it's winter. So you want to try and back into that with whatever the decision is going to be so you can break ground before winter so we don't lose another year and a half. And then there's a potentially have weekly town council meetings until project is awarded. again, that's just to demonstrate that we're committed to getting what we need to get done. That's it.
Good job.
Councilman Barbera, may I ask a question?
Absolutely.
Mayor, thank you, this is really a great presentation. One thing I want to mention is the community center, and I think last year I really mentioned it multiple times, because to me, that's a really important component. I think the community center serves so many purposes for whether it's the senior citizens, whether it's our children, the summer camp and so on, that I don't think we should exclude it from our considerations in terms of cost. The previous recommendation for the new build was not including a community center, and I had asked council last year to add the community center to the secondary structure that was being proposed to that new build. Whatever it is that we decide, may I ask the council to please consider the community center as a must-have and a need, not something to be left to be discussed 2 years later. Whether it is, we do a renovation and therefore it doesn't impact the community center, or whether we go forward with the plans from last year or whatever we do. But I really think that, the previous ideas have been that potentially, the bicentennial hall could fulfill the needs of the community center. I think it could fulfill some needs, but not all the needs. It's not a conducive place for children, in my opinion, or for a summer camp. And I believe also someone had told me, and tell me if I'm incorrect about this, that a new area inside of DPW, what had been envisioned as a new DPW, would add, a room where people could use it as, for meetings and so on. And I just don't think that either of them really were ideas that really could fulfill the need and the use that we have today of the community center. So I just wanted to make that strong point that, I'm willing to consider all the options, but I really think that that's not a deferred cost that we should leave for later. We should include that in our considerations and know exactly what's going to happen to it and how we're going to either save it or make sure it's elsewhere. And that can cost us, if we're going to put it, I don't know, at Zephyr Fields, wherever that might be, that's a cost that we should consider now. That would be my suggestion.
I would take that step that can go a little bit farther in support of what you said. I think you and I probably have the same rush to action. Wait, community center is used 300-400 times a year in its current configuration. We all know it's very modest and in some ways doesn't meet the needs of the community. The bigger question is, well, what would the community center, if we were to imagine it that in its perfect form, would serve fair even now and into the future? I don't think we have the answer to that question. However, I would love to have that conversation and explore it. In the meantime, we cannot afford to, we can't function as a community without a community center. So even if there is an interim or a placeholder or something that we cannot move forward on a PD without also accommodating, even in a temporary form, that's okay, a community facility that supports our current activities, which I think we can expect to expand as a very active community. I wanted to go back to the PD quickly, and I just appreciate that you have all this information again in one place. And ask you if maybe we could thumbnail this, and there's all of us can pull numbers. There's some industry standards about the cost of the community PD. We have average square foot costs of other facilities. If we took the average square footage for compared to other communities, which I think you said was just under 5,000. Let's round up for simple math and say 5,000 square foot community PD. What would be a good multiplier for cost per square foot so we can ballpark a budget and understand what it might cost to build a new PD with that kind of square footage that would address everything that you've enumerated for us, guided by Department of Justice, Department of Corrections, and the IACP.
So if you go to slide 2, well, it's not up there. The last bullet gives the industry data from 2021, right? So the calculation was specifically focused on using a medical center.
Okay,
Police department, right, which is 720 square foot, which it should not be anywhere near that, and I adjusted that for inflation. So I got 779 a square foot, which is a lot of money.
yeah,
If, from my assessment, what I believe, and please keep me on here, Mr. Rule, is that a police department, with the exception of the cells, is classified as B use, which means it's an office building.
mm,
So there's standards to how big offices should be, there's standards to the walls, the fire requirements, all that.
mhm,
The cells, that area would be considered industrial use.
mm.
Even better though, the Department of Corrections tells you exactly what the cell construction has to be and material has to be. So if you look at an office building is 518, I don't know what 518 times 1.0815 is, if anyone's
Okay.
calculator.
But lower than the medical.
It would be somewhere between that and a medical square foot. The one unknown, and this is why we need to engage with the LSRP, is to understand true environmental remediation.
Mhm.
Um,
I'm gonna get my calculator out.
yeah, I don't know if anybody has 518 times 1.0815. That will get you
5805.
1.0815 times 518.
I just do it again while you're doing, go ahead, say it again.
518 times 1.0815.
That's inflation.
That's inflation.
Inflation.
I need a square footage figure.
Oh, times 5,000.
Yeah,
Sorry.
Is it really 5,000 if we're doing a community center and a
Yeah, that would just be-
garage?
that would-
I would be careful, yeah.
2.8.
so fair point, it would be more, but that number comes in at just about 2.6. And current estimates for the OEM and the garage or the community center, you know. such
Right,
as
and that's, I mean,
it's
that's
about $1
basically a
million.
shell, that's a very simple building.
Yeah,
It's much cheaper.
I would have figured that
to
would be
account
much
for it.
cheaper. I don't know what the square footage was, maybe 3,000 total, 2,000 total, I don't know what the square footage
about,
was.
I think it was a little bit, it was 3,000 at least.
You think so?
What do you-
Well, not just the garage, but
Yeah.
the addition of the, you know,
Bathrooms.
1,500 square
That was
foot
an 1,800 square foot base pad,
for the,
the detached garage.
And the community center?
Yeah, because that was
Okay,
all
so-
in that area. I have, I'm not gonna bring my laptop, but
I think
yeah.
it's a little, but anyway. I
So
think-
18, so say 2,000 times, that would have to be cheaper, because that's just a block.
I have the
building.
numbers, yeah. Because the community center for the architect building was 400K. The detached garage was 400K and then plus another 200. It wasn't.
I
that
thought it
much.
was under $1 million.
Yeah, it was
Okay.
significantly under $1 million.
Okay, and those numbers are, as we know, are kind of thick. So.
Yes, they're padded nicely.
Yeah, so, you know,
I'm
it
gonna
could cover us.
bring it up later.
2/3 of the cost estimate in the past was engineering. Was tearing it down, was filling it back in, was excavating the new land, was putting in all of the hard surfaces and so forth. So just keep that in the back of your head as well. So I know we're calculating square footage here. I think we've got to be careful about it.
I think the other comment would be, you know, like, we have an estimate from last year from an architectural design for a new building. Do we want to start all over again?
I think
And
that's a $8 million.
from scratch again and consider like get a new architect for a completely new redesign, okay, for maybe the must-haves only? How long is that going to take? Or do we want to just, do we want to just renovate what we have? So it's like,
So.
and I always feel like, you know, we had something that was designed before. It was quite pricey.
Correct,
We might want to cut it down somehow,
right.
or we can renovate, but to start from scratch, from an efficiency perspective, and then considering how much money, I think Teresa can tell us how much we spent just on the architectural design. And it was not small dollars.
We can all tell that.
And spend another 2 years designing a building that I think we all recognize has mold in it.
No,
I mean, I really feel that, you know, we either cut, I don't want to be redundant, but either we cut back what we had and move forward, or we just decide to renovate and figure out how to do it in the most efficient way possible, because I just don't think that we can go another year or two
No, that's why we put timelines on this.
starting again.
So Based on lead times, design and redesign, irrespective, takes 6 weeks, and review takes 6 weeks, 3 months. Once the decision is made to move forward, the architect requires from lead time is another 3 months to put together all of the construction package or construction package details, everything. There's all this other drawing. So it wouldn't be 2 years. Either way, if there's redesign work, which there might have to be because the ADA compliance can be updated, you're talking 6 weeks average for an architectural redesign.
That's assuming you get an architect, and the architect is available to start right away, and he can deliver on your
100%
time, so
agree.
I think realistically, I'm not clear, I mean, that the time frame that we're thinking about is the time frame that it would be.
Well, maybe we
Can
can
I-
work with that. Yeah.
Councilman, just one thing. So from my perspective in having dealt with the architect, there's no, as you put, cutting back to get to what we're talking about, 5,000 square feet. It doesn't exist from his standpoint. His cutting back was to delete a little bit more than half of the basement, delete some of the offsite improvements, the masonry base, delete finished flooring from the stairs, the chimneys, and epoxy flooring. That's when we talked about what were the, you know, the value engineering savings, that's what he was willing to do. He basically said, once you remove the entire basement, well, now I have to put all the HVAC equipment in different places. I'm redoing all my drawings. So we're either pretty much building the building he designed as is, or we're renovating, or we're designing a new building. That's where we're at.
What is the square footage as Eli has it drawn?
7,000 for the PD, 8,500 total.
8,500 square feet.
And the police department and the community center initial cost estimate was just shy of 7.5 million.
Big difference.
It's a big building.
7.06 million
and a
for the
big price
PD,
tag.
400K for the community center. That's what was budgeted for the community center.
Mhm.
So maybe we should take serious consideration for, you know, is a renovation realistic and achievable? Yes or no? So that we
I
know,
don't think
if
so.
it's not, then okay, then let's get off the table. Then are we gonna start from scratch again?
Yeah, I think
Design?
anything other than some cosmetic work and get rid of mold, any kind of renovation, you really can't do, because the cells you can't configure to ever meet DOC.
Right.
I just think that you really cannot renovate the design of it now.
So choice one is gone.
Right.
Choice one, your choice is 1 and 3, I think, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and you know, we,
It was the decision for us to
yeah,
make.
and we have looked at this, I mean, you know, going back from 16 or 17, that was an option, and due to different reasons, it was just never, we could never make it happen. That's why we looked at it, but that was talked about in the beginning of all this many times.
Right.
That's where we are.
New building at Fisk makes no sense.
New building,
35 Fisk Street.
I agree.
new building, meaning like get a new architect and get or new
No, I'm not saying
architect.
that, but I'm just
plans and
saying
so on?
new building at Fisk so that
As
they can
opposed to-
stay in the PD and as the work is done and transition them out and demo it,
Okay,
makes no sense.
All right.
That next
I
step,
don't think we
Makes
can
most
fully
sense, because you're
remediate
saying
the
it so
mold.
fast, it
Yes,
sounds like it
no,
makes no
makes
sense.
oh, makes most
Most
sense.
sense.
Apologies, makes most sense.
Okay, so maybe we
I
can,
don't think we
My
can
bad.
get all the mold out, but
So-
renovation.
okay, so at least we can maybe come to some initial
Yes.
agreement that the renovation option is off the table.
Agree.
Okay. I mean, at least that gives us a little.
I agree,
right?
yes.
Um,
The
Everyone
new
agrees.
building makes the
We all-
most
we all feel the same.
sense. Sorry, hold on, Nathan.
So I had a couple of quick notes. You know, I would support finishing the design for the community center.
Mhm.
I think everyone around the table thinks that that's a requirement
Mhm.
and it's a must-have. So I think finishing that design is probably, well, not probably, it's a requirement before we go out to bid. Unstapling, which is not something we talked a lot about during this presentation, but right now we have designs that are combined with the DPW, and I think that we all agree we're gonna unstaple those. And I think there's some costs associated with unstapling those, or we can put it all out to bid and just tell people,
Yeah.
don't bid on the DPW. We need to figure that out and get comfortable with that, but that's another step we need to take.
Can I say a quick?
Only if we're building the building as designed already.
Right.
Otherwise, we don't need to unstaple that from DPW because we wouldn't be doing either design.
Right, but
If
Mayor,
we start from scratch with a new architect, we don't need
Yeah.
to unstaple the existing.
I won't have to worry about that because I do think it's gonna take many months to get a new
yeah,
architect.
I mean,
It's
that's
gonna take months for them
realistically,
to start. I don't have to worry about that because
look,
my
I'm
term will be
happy to
over.
look at our options, but I'm just thinking, considering inflation, interest rates, you know, the realities of getting an architect and being on their schedule and having them be able to deliver. By the time we get a new design for a new building, I don't know, the end of this year. I'm just being a devil's advocate.
fair.
We might end up not too far away from maybe the design that we already have and maybe try to see if we can work with somebody else to help us further cut back that design or, you know, the costs for that construction that we already have in place, because it almost seems to me that by the time you start all over again, it's just the realities of what we're saving might be less than what you're both in time
Fair.
and in finances. And it's not because I'm married to that building that was designed by any means. I'm just trying to think efficiently.
I
And
think there's some
financially.
unknowns, and I think it certainly, you know, that, I'm not sure what the mayor, you know, my colleagues, what you guys think about a conversation with Eli. And Mayor, you're probably in a better position to guide us on that, but I mean, I believe there's some language in our contract that allows Fairhaven to be the owner of those plans. Would that be correct?
Be our work product.
Okay. Having established that, then the next question is there a possibility of working with the current architect to see if there's a way to modify the plans? And I really truly believe the building is too big. And I believe that's helping to drive up a price tag that I'm not comfortable paying. And you know, I don't think I have to poll my neighbors and friends in town to get confirmation for that. I think it's too expensive. So I think our path forward is to discern how best to get a modest and reasonable, well-designed project that basically meets these requirements. We don't need bells and whistles. We need to meet these requirements, get a functional PD, and let them do the job that they do so well, even in a building that doesn't really support the work that you do for us. So, and I don't know if that is with Eli or another architect, but I also feel we should move expeditiously. And I'm comfortable with either one of those paths as long as it moves quickly. If we get resistance from Eli, I'm comfortable going the other direction.
I'm comfortable if you guys want me to bring Eli in to have a conversation. My concern obviously is what I said, which is from having discussed this with him several times, it sounds as if we want to significantly alter the square footage of the police department, he sees it as a redesign. And the only consideration I can give is on Bicentennial Hall.
Yeah.
We asked Elliot, we asked them for a price quote on the service, and we asked another architect for a price quote on the service, and the other one came in at 1/3 the price. So we've already poured, is it 600K, 700K into, I mean, at a certain point, we gotta shut the spigot off here. It's getting a little crazy and make a decision for what's best for Fairhaven. Now, if that's what's best, I agree. That's how we go forward. I'm happy to have that conversation with Eli. We can bring him in just as we brought Brian in and ask him some questions and get the answers that we need so we can move forward. But I agree. I think we all agree. This, again, is a priority and we need to move expeditiously.
So we could have millions and millions of dollars of litigation and health issues on our hands as a result of punting again for another year or 2 or 7. And I got the head shaking out in the audience. The health and safety, I mean, we're sitting here talking about 600 grand and we're gonna have millions of dollars of lawsuits on our hands. It's not right. We need to take this thing forward and get it done. I think that renovating a not purpose-built 2-story, you gotta decide you're gonna go up or down when you go in the front door, wrong move. We all agree that renovation off the table. I think we've got to move forward with the design that Andy Trocchia, who's an architect, helped design. Andy Ashwell, who was on the finance facilities committee, helped design. He builds commercial spaces. Andy Sobel was on the facilities committee. All of these guys poured hours and days and weeks and months into the design. I don't agree with Councilwoman Cole that 7,200 square feet is the wrong number and that it is too expensive. I actually disagree. I think that the design and the programming that was come up with by the police department and by all of the volunteers in this town is spot on. It's a good design. It's a sound design. It's appropriate for what we do. So delaying and pushing it out another 6 months or another year for 600 grand because we don't like the architect is foolish. It's going to cost us millions and millions of dollars. And it's just a wrong thing to do for our employees. I think we really need to consider to take this current project forward and put it on the table of maybe bringing in Eli is the right move.
I'll bring them in. I don't understand. The only thing I don't understand from what you're saying is that it's going to cost us millions and millions of dollars by redesigning the
In
building.
litigation,
We're in essence,
in health and litigation, that we're just punting it another year. And
Chief, do we have a safety issue currently?
Well, we have,
From a litigation
Well, we have-
perspective,
we
has
have
it been
both.
deemed safe to work in or no?
well, we've had the inspected, the last 6 years, we've had it inspected probably 10, 15 times. And they put these filters in to get rid of mold. But,
It removes the mold
Mold.
spores out of the air.
Yeah.
Doesn't remove the source of the
Correct.
mold.
And
Right, so as
I
you
think
said,
that we
shows
keep
like-
put it off, and, we've been doing this for, 6, 7 years, and, every time it was like, let's not remove mold, we don't remove building, let's not do this, not do that, and it comes to a point, I agree with Chris, we came so far, and this design of the building was not done by me, my input, Chris's input, but it wasn't like, I wanted this big, this is what, we had all these experts come in, and this is what they said, including Eli, when he built it, and we did downsize it some already. And we did talk about just get rid of the basement, right? Just eliminate the basement, actually save, and then, tell me if I'm correct, Eli said that the savings is so significant that it really just, that basement space of 2,000 square feet. was-
Eli says we cannot get rid of the basement because he designed it with the
Correct.
HVAC equipment inside the basement.
Correct.
He also said that if we get rid of the basement, the footings in the building
Correct,
will negate the savings from
exactly,
getting rid of the basement itself.
exactly, that's
So
why.
basically, he's designed the most perfect building that's ever been designed. And anything that we try and do to change that building is going to result in us being liable for millions of dollars. I don't think that that's fair to this governing body. I think what we're trying to do is make the best decision for Fairhaven. Once again, the safety of your officers is paramount, but that should also not scare us into making a, knee-jerk decision to spend an extra, how many millions of dollars?
We don't know, that's the problem,
Right.
because by the time, and back to, I am not married to any design, and I'm happy to look at all the numbers. But I think if you really look realistically at financially, how much it's going to cost to get a new architect and to design everything new and to come up with, let's say, a reduced building. So, okay, what is that gonna get us to? Are we gonna get out of that 7 million down to 5? And then we're gonna build it in 2 years? And then we're gonna have to issue a bond with higher interest rates, and we're gonna be dealing with more inflation. I'm not clear that we're gonna achieve such a cost savings that it's worth waiting the potential amount of time we're gonna be dealing with, because I just don't think it's gonna happen at all, that you're gonna hire someone in 6 weeks and get a design in another 6. I think you're looking at 2 years, because that's how long it took to get to where the council got last year, to the design, and everyone, including the community, was consulted. So I just think we need to think very hard about that, whether we are trying to save, use our funds in a responsible manner and save for the community, but at a cost that at the end of the day might not be what we're thinking.
But it's not just
And just
cost.
delaying the issue further.
It also comes down to though confidence in the architect. It comes down to, right, the architect's gonna be wedded to us, and I'm not picking a side right now, right? But it's not one-dimensional, right? You never throw good money at a bad investment. I'm not saying this was a bad investment in what we have, right? But you have the confidence piece that plays. We set the requirements, right? We decide what the square footage is, we decide what the budget is, and we work from there, right? And I know there was a tremendous amount of work doing that. And I think the current design looks pretty good, but I think there's additional square footage that could be brought down, because when you assess $550 a square foot, which is how much is assessed right now, every square foot you move is a significant amount of money.
Right, but I agree, and maybe we should try to do that, but all I'm saying is that that has already been done by the prior councils. And the prior facilities committee that I think, Councilman Rodriguez has mentioned, the number of people who were involved. So I think it's hard to come into something that maybe is new and has already been done. But the realities of trying to essentially rebuild everything, which it also includes community feedback, and looking at the design, making sure that it matches what we want. It's a design that is not going to stick out. It's not going to look wrong for the location and so on. I think there are a lot of considerations. You need to bring the public in again. There's a lot of considerations that you have to take into that you need to, there's a long path. It's not something that you can all of a sudden say, okay, I'm going to take away this 2-year, 3-year job and start new just because I don't like the architect. Maybe there's a way that we can work through differences and come up with some cost reduction, but not start anew in a path that I would suggest is uncertain.
So
That's
my
fine.
understanding though is we're saying redesign and redesign, right? Eli's saying redesign, or we redesign with an architect, so a new architect, right? So either way, we're redesigning, right? So the matter, that's really the question. It's
But
going to be.
you have a
either
plan
way.
that is done.
And also, I just want to say, you keep saying we don't like the architect. We don't like the size of the building based on how much it costs to borrow money now and how much the building costs. It's not necessarily the architect.
Right.
It's the building.
And Mr.
And
Mayor,
it's not that it's a bad building, it's just, is that building necessary? Do the taxpayers of Fairhaven want to spend their money on space that they don't need?
and can I just say one thing, because I just want to come back to something, right, you articulated about how potentially it's overwhelming coming in a new position and seeing it. The data point that I'm using here is that the new building for DPW that Brian Mead assessed was 61% lower in cost than what the initial bid of the DPW building that was done by the architect. So it's not a question of saying the previous facilities committee didn't do it. It's not a question of saying this is so overwhelming, I don't have all the data points, right? That was the whole goal of spending hours and hours to put this together. My data point is that if there's a 61% reduction in what Brian Mead put together compared to what the original bid was, then I'm saying that there's likely additional, not only cost savings in what the bid proposal is, but also the size of the building, right? So that's the data point that sticks out to me, that the $7.46 million price tag, I think is grossly exaggerated. I did.
So are
I
you suggesting,
wonder-
sorry, I just want to clarify, are you suggesting that when we get an actual bid, it may come lower than that?
Well, if we,
Or you're
if we,
just suggesting that the building was overly done and overly designed, and there's too much extra there that is not necessary? I'm just trying to figure out
Twofold.
which one do you need?
twofold. The first one is if the Brian Mead exercise shows us anything, right? It shows us that his estimate for a new building is 61% less than what the architect assessed would it cost. That's the fact, right? The second fact is when you look at the average cost of an office building and the square footage, there's a direct correlation between decrease in the size of the square footage and a decrease in the cost. That is all that I'm saying, right? I'm not saying that the design doesn't meet, right? I'm not saying that it's grandiose or not, right? All I'm saying is that there's 2 data points that we have based on the exercises that have already taken place with DPW that should have us ensure that it's the right size from the square footage, right? And then that's the right size from a dollar value.
I would just mention that I think the only thing we need to consider that's different though, is that Brian Mead was looking at a renovation or a Butler building, none of which I think are options for the police department.
Sure.
You're not gonna have a Butler building for the police department, we're not gonna have a renovation. So I am more skeptical about what you're gonna encounter when you simply redesign a new building with a new architect.
Well,
But
Eli,
Eli's
I
saying
think
he
we'll
needs to
just-
redesign.
I think just
We'll
as a, there is, Brian Mead did do an estimate for the PD. Not as a renovation, he just did an estimate, and we can look at it again together or whatever, that was delivered to
He
someone.
did analysis of Eli's estimate.
Of your
Correct,
lives.
and it was about $2 million less. That is a very big number. I'll just leave it there. But there's one thing it seems to me is two things that we have at our fingertips now that we didn't have years ago, or maybe we did and I just don't know. But we have the basic bones of a program that would drive the components of the PD. And we also have a grasp on what the rough estimate in terms of square footage, cost per square foot, like we get our head around that. And I'm wondering, one of the steps could be looking at the plans as they are drawn now, which are about 8,500 square feet of building, which is a lot of building in a residential neighborhood. And I don't want to, and look at it to see how it lines up with the program that was in your presentation, that is required by either statute, Department of Corrections, Department of Justice, and our IACP. My guess is that it's in there. It's just there's also extra other stuff. Maybe it's essential or necessary other stuff in terms of square footage, right? Like there's going to be square footage for circulation. There's going to be
Yeah.
square footage for file storage.
Compared to the old building, the only thing we really gain is one office, the Sally Port,
The training room.
Locker room.
and the second locker room, and a upstairs, there's a meeting room and a training room. Already have, so we've gained one training room.
The office, the Sally.
One
Port,
office,
the
Sally
locker
Port,
room.
Yeah, the
and one
second
locker.
floor is-
So
Yeah,
it's, a lot of it's in the basement, right? A lot of it's eaten up in the basement. And then, like you said, it's, if you have a 5,000 square foot now compared to what you're gonna, or past, what you can build now is gonna be 6, because you got all the ADA you have to do that you didn't have to do before, that adds it. But there wasn't a whole lot extra in there. There's a few things, but it wasn't like we doubled all the stuff. Like you said, we added one office, a locker room, a meeting room.
the meeting room and the
like
training
gun
room,
cleaning.
they sound redundant. I mean, is it because you need a department for a meeting?
Yeah, we're gonna have like a meeting conference room and then a training room. But, I think that, the best thing I think would be to have a conversation with Eli and say, what can we reduce in here?
Right.
That's reasonable. What's the cost? What would it cost to have you redesign it? Since I would have to say that he would be less expensive than a new architect coming in because he already has the plans. He already has all the stuff for it, has the size of the lot. He knows all that. And we might be able to look at
But
that.
those are our
building.
plans.
No, I know, but I'm saying he already has the experience with it, I'll say, or the numbers. He knows, the outlay of it and everything. We already paid for all that through him. That you bring a new architect in has to relook at all that. And that, maybe we can just meet with them and say, if we got rid of the basement, if we got rid of this room, then how many square feet and what would the cost be? And what would it cost for him to redesign?
And maybe put it out for bid, because I think you said, I think I hear from both of you, that the real price might be lower than the
Yeah.
estimated price provided by Eli. Maybe we should find out.
If we put out the
We're
bid, I'm
going
just
on a
mentioning we
much
gotta
bigger,
understand.
on a much bigger track of,
I don't want to put
starting
something
off
out to
from
bid
scratch.
that I don't think we should build. I think we should be clear about our intention.
we should know what the
only need
numbers
4
are.
votes.
Well, you
To
can
determine
estimate
that.
to get the number.
If we want to put it out to bid, we only need 4 votes. And if we want to understand what the prices are, if it's off by $2 million, that's great. Maybe we do want that building
Yeah.
for $2 million
If it's 2
less.
million
If
less,
what you said before was actually true.
and we make some
Right.
cuts, maybe that
Right.
is, maybe we don't want to go the track of starting again. I'm just trying to figure out efficiently, how do we, because I just find that this is a much bigger,
Well, I think
A
I
much,
want to
much
agree with
more-
one
much
thing you said.
riskier
The
task.
the process, government processes are slower and take longer than hiring an architect and doing a house, for example. So it could take 6 weeks to get an architect, but then we do need to allow for public input sessions and process. That's what government does.
that's an
So-
year plus.
Well, no, and working on a timeline might be worthwhile, but what, I don't know if I made my point, but checking the plans for these programmatic elements that are critical and necessary and seeing, I think it'd be good to get a handle on it. I think we have some initial, it's possibly 8,600 square feet compared to maybe 5,000 is a much bigger building. If we can use that square footage for something and the council can see that it's a worthwhile investment,
If we're counting empty basement space, in that square footage. I don't know that that's gonna be a fair way to,
It's
you know,
7,000.
calculate.
7,000 without basement.
And
Yeah.
I think you
Yeah,
mentioned
the
it has
basement's
to
got-
be ADA compliant.
It's got no we're not fitting it. We're not finishing that basement. It's not finished.
How soon can we talk to Eli and in what
One-
forum?
One of the things that did come up multiple times during facilities, and Councilman Rodriguez can attest this, you know, we wanted to avoid having the police department relocate to exit building. For Drew's earlier comment of what it costs to put a working police department, you know, on an annual basis in trailers and everything. And it was a significant cost. If you did that, you know, you could possibly scale down the building and only have it be one floor, closer to your 5,000 square feet. But in order to go to a two-story building, which we have to do under the fact that we're not going to, you know, leave the police department empty and knock it down, it takes additional square footage to accommodate the second floor for all of the other egresses and stairways and things that actually go into moving into a second floor. It came up,
That's the circulation
yes.
that I mentioned earlier, circulation.
I'm not saying it's 3,000, I'm just saying it's different between a one-story building versus a two-story.
Right, you have the elevator, you have the counter for it, you have the two staircases that take a lot of square footage up, so.
So I think we agree,
Knowing-
we want to talk to Eli, right? What's
I would like to do that
fastest
next week.
way we can do that? And in what
I'm
form?
sure he'll meet with us at your request, facilities committee with the full governing body, you just tell me what you want to do.
Mr. Mayor, I would like to have the conversation, whoever wants to join, as we can within the law, to meet with him next week, and then potentially have him here on the 23rd. I also want to come back to the idea of being able to get a true cost of what the current PD would look like. Because we're talking in abstracts, right? I can say the current PD estimate includes a 13.5% inflation bump, and then another 5% inflation bump on top of that, right? To get to that 7.5 million, right? We have a mean number, that's the 5 million. So I think meeting with the architect next week and talking through what we could redesign, not what we will, what we could redesign, and what that decreases in square footage, and then what the actual cost of the current PD would cost us. Those would be two data points, I think, that are really important for us to make our decision.
The only thing I want to add is what we touched upon tonight is the site work, the site plan as it stands, as it's currently designed. The site plan is driven by the footprint of the new building. The parking lot layout, the internal circulation based on vehicles and pedestrian to the fields, to the back building. The linkages that were created, all the stuff that we worked on for years, we brought it to the planning board and got their input, et cetera. So aside from the work that's been done, if you change
Change that too.
now, whether or not Eli can consolidate within that same
Yeah.
structure and footprint, I think that's what I'm hearing. So hopefully most of that site work is usable from a design perspective. So just wanted to add that because he has his team of engineers that we've worked with as well, guiding them accordingly with all that.
Except for the loss of the trees, the site work and the layout, in my opinion, meets the needs of the community, the connections and the circulation.
Sure.
Except for potentially a drop off now at the community center, you know, in behind the OEM. But
The only unknown we had at the time though was the parking demand.
yeah,
So that was still being looked at, whether or not what's designed met the needs of the fields, the facility, the back building that we looked at adding with the meeting room. and
Yeah.
Some of that space, and then looking at the surrounding on-street parking available, some of the overflow parking on Third Street.
well,
That's
it's a
there.
lot like what we do now. It's catch as catch can, and it might remain that way. But a drop off would help take depressure that area, which is going to congest the PD parking lot. But this is a future decision. This is a very substantive discussion, and there's a lot of information to metabolize here tonight. But what I want to throw out one thing, which is this council might benefit from a facilities audit, meaning a look at the facilities comprehensively so that we understand what the square footage is, we understand how much basement storage we have, how many files we have to store. We have Christmas decorations, where do they live, who's building what on a rainy day, and where does that happen? what are we still paying for? What's paid off? What needs repairs? What's the condition of that? I mean, these are not the only two facilities in the borough. I don't want to see us handcuff ourselves and not be in a position to properly address, at a minimum, the maintenance issues that are before, if they're not here in front of us now, they will be. And frankly, the next level of discussion probably has to include maintenance beyond our physical facilities and look at the natural areas that need attention. And I'll stop there because there's more information, but it feels like it's something we may need to consider, and I can do some legwork to get some actual information in front of council if you think that might be helpful. I don't know what it would cost. I just know it's information that we need long-term. Something to think about.
Mario, let me just jump in real quick. Sure. It appears that everyone has obviously some concerns here. And so there was a mention of having a committee meeting, a facilities meeting. But the fact is that we can't violate, obviously, the Open Public Meetings Act. And if everyone wants to be involved, there's two options. Another special meeting or the 23rd, to have Eli come, explain everything and do his presentation. So those are the two options that I would see as being reasonable here.
Third option would also be that the select facilities chairs meet with Eli, just the two, and have some initial discussions, and then still have Eli come on the 23rd.
But then he would, right, so there would only be certain input from council, right?
Correct.
What are the liaison?
It's Councilman Hoey, Councilman Lumber.
Okay, so the two of you would be present, would report back,
Right.
and then we would
And the
still
mayor.
have, and then we'd still have the same questions
Yeah,
and clarifications that would be asked of at the 23rd meeting. So I don't know if,
I think realistically, you're gonna end up exactly in that situation that everybody
Answer
has
all
all
the
the questions.
questions and have a conversation.
think so.
I come back to
That's
the
what it
tally to the requirements. I don't mind meeting with Eli, and if there's questions, we can field it, have him still come. I'm trying to do things, as many things concurrently we can do to get the information, make a decision. And again, I want to come back to being able to get a true cost of the police department of what it would be.
I don't have any problem with them meeting with Eli in advance of the meeting, and then also bring Eli in. And, I'll be happy to be in the meeting. I'll be happy for you to join the meeting if you want, what you
Well, you'll have
want
to
to take my
rotate out.
place, whatever it is. But I would like to move the process along.
Yeah, I think
Time is of the essence.
you have to meet with him first to kind of give him the heads up and
Sure.
have some thoughts. Maybe you just hit him on the 23rd. You're not gonna have any answers.
And you can't have council members rotate in that same committee meeting.
Right.
It has to be,
No.
right,
For the one meeting, you said.
when you meet with Eli, you
Right.
can have three
Three
government
of them, and
documents.
that's it.
That's
Correct. Correct.
you can't do it, really,
should do
but you
that.
can, you should, yeah.
Councilwoman
Gather as
Hoey
much
and I-
information as we can,
Correct.
right? And then everyone reads it beforehand, and we can come to a consensus, hopefully on the 23rd.
Yeah, it still leaves, I like the facility needs assessment, and it still leaves getting a true cost of it. And if that means bidding it, okay, if that means some other measure, but I think we need both of those data points. And if we're gonna take the requirements that exist, especially from the mold perspective and the safety perspective, right? We need to try to get that information to run later, following proper process and protocol. But I think the scenario and situation rises to a level that we need to move a little bit quicker than we normally would do. Not hastily, not fiscally responsible, but a little bit quicker. So I want to try and get a cost of the PD. I don't know, I welcome feedback on the best way. Ms. Schobel, I don't know if you have a best process for us to do that, whether that's prime meat or bifurcating them and sending it out to bid. I welcome.
Or what are the industry standards say about the cost per square foot for community PD? This is a knowable number. And it wouldn't give us the exact cost of the building. It would give us an idea.
It would.
In which we then can add the soft costs and calculate all the.
But that's the B's, right? We have that,
Correct.
right? That's the office building, but
Correct.
A lot of these PDs, Atlantic Highlands, which we saw on the presentation, Rumson, which we saw in the presentation, they all share service, that building with other departments, but borough needs. So the elevators and the stairwells and the meeting rooms and the front door and the back door, that's all shared amongst multiple departments, including engineering. The building department that we use, that we outsource to Rumson, is in that police department building. The mayor and the council chambers and the court system that we use is in that building. They're sharing bathrooms, they're sharing all of the storage. What we're doing, unfortunately for us, and we need to really think about this, we're doing it in that site, and we're not sharing that with any other rec department. We're not sharing it with any of the folks in this building. So it's a whole new set of stairs, it's a whole new set of elevators, it's a whole new front door and a secure facility. So all of that stuff is gonna add up for our building. That's not shown when we look at those presentations. And I think your presentation was fantastic for the police department. It's just not apples to apples always. And so we've just got to be careful when we're looking for that estimate. We have to understand what our limitations are in this town at that site.
Fair.
Yeah.
I agree.
Okay.
So how do we get a cost for the current drawings?
We had one.
For
Well,
current drawings of the
Eli's
meeting, we already have.
We have
We
Brian
have
Mead's assessment of that.
Yeah, we have two assessments. I think we should, see what else we can cut and then go off of that, get a real number.
Mhm.
That would be my suggestion, because anything else we do is gonna take a long.
Yeah,
time.
and I would be more than happy, like I said, I'm sure Rich would join us, right? So we need like, what can we, if we can get rid of something on there to bring that square footage down, but like you said before, we had this conversation, Eli, and to get rid of the basement, all right, again, let's go back to this, to get rid of the basement. That basement might have only cost you $300,000 because the square footage of the basement might be less than somewhere else. So if we eliminate the basement, that might not bring that price back down. And my understanding, that's the conversation we had with them, but I think we should meet with them, see how much it would cost to redesign it and how much savings there is to get rid of the basement or get rid of that second room upstairs. But that, most of the cost is in like the cell area. That's where most of the cost is. So the cell area might be $700 square foot, but that room on second floor might only be $200 square foot. So they're like Councilman said, it may not be as much as we think, and we've been down this road, we have talked to Eli, but I think the best bet is to go to Eli and say, what would it cost to redesign it? And what do you think the savings are if we got rid of this, this, and this, and then decide if it's worth it or not, then get this out the bid.
If we get this out the bid, we're not required to
Move forward.
move forward with the proposals.
Right.
So that's great. It gives us something to anchor off of from a cost perspective. There is a cost associated with putting the bid out, which includes unstapling, which
It's
Mayor
about,
mentioned.
I think it's about $10,000.
Okay.
Was it 1 to 2 weeks or 2 to 3 weeks?
Well, he doesn't.
Right in that same.
Somewhere in
You
there.
could put a cover memo on this and say there's.
Or no
individuals
cost, right.
are not in contracts.
And then the other thing we need to do is we need to finish the community center aspect of it, because the designs are not finished. They're close.
No, I know.
But they're
and
not
I
finished.
will just add that, I think it's a decent response to the situation, though I think, it was sort of a, well, wait, let's do something quick. I mean, I think that is responsive, but not necessarily a complete and fulsome response to what Fairhaven's community center needs are.
Is it truly possible to bid the PD with the current drawings and say leave DPW out?
Yeah,
Yes. That's what you're saying.
Yes.
That's possible?
Yeah.
So why wouldn't we just do that?
because we want to know we're gonna build it.
But
But we,
if it's no extra cost to us to bifurcate, if we don't have to spend the 10K,
Mhm.
and we can put out the bid and it doesn't cost us any money, but we will get a true bid cost of it, why wouldn't we want to do that?
Well, I would want to know we're gonna build it. That's truly, it's an ethical, it's a professional
But you
thing.
need
I'm
to
not
know, but
doing
we
it
already
as an
have-
exercise to get it, and the estimate is too high.
but
That's-
we cannot get a real number, because I think we've said 7.5, I think we said 5, I think we heard all kinds of different things, and then we're trying to calculate what would be the square footage if we were to start all over again. We're all over the place.
I think I recall asking Eli whether we could just put that memo to ignore DPW, and I might not be remembering this properly. I think he said it was problematic.
Well, he said the contractors would be confused,
I believe
which I
that's what
think
he said.
is,
Listen, I also don't want to bid
Exactly.
something out and then they are confused and, we got a cellar.
We
I
can
think there was a town that was nearby that they built the cellar the wrong height or something like that. Do I have that right?
The whole first floor of Sallyport and everything was too low.
Was too low. And that's not what we want. We don't want to spend all this money and have the wrong building.
Well, I
That's-
think
I'm just
that,
mentioning.
again, the community center, I think, wasn't fixed on, but the PD was pretty much, 99.99% exactly. We worked on this a long time, so I do believe that is correct.
Can we
And you
meet with
could
Brian next
remove
week?
what the mayor earlier said, could be removed,
Hmm.
The listing of things we talked about that could be taken out. I think, I think.
I have that list right
Yeah,
here.
it
I know.
didn't result in any real substantive.
It was, the basement room was $287,000. But we were gonna be charged $16,000 to redesign that, to take it out. Offsite improvements was another $100,000. And then the last four are big nothing burger. I mean, it's delete masonry base, finished flooring from the stairs, chimneys and epoxy flooring. All those combined are $60,000, those last four.
Yeah, the only thing I'll add, and I did this months ago, but every line item that's there is roughly doubled when you add all the percentages, the contingencies and the contractor's percentage and so on. So whatever is, to call it 300,000, ultimately is 300,000 in terms of what taxpayers are going to be paying.
Can
So
we,
it could add up.
can we meet with Eli next week, and can we meet with Brian on his estimate? I guess, Rich, you could be there.
Brian's estimate, for the PD is not line, but not like we looked at for
No,
DPW.
okay.
I can send it to you, Drew. I thought I already did, but.
You
I'll
might
send it.
have, okay.
It's a square
Yeah,
footage.
we'll work on those meetings.
Yeah.
And then on the 23rd, if all the meetings are squared away and they've occurred and we're moving forward, we'll bring them in on the 23rd. Yeah.
And maybe,
Absolutely.
maybe try, the month after that to make a hard decision, go or no go. Or start again, that's just my view, that I really think it's an emergency at this point.
I agree.
And we're all in agreement that it's a new bill,
Yeah.
right?
No, I know it's a new bill, but it's really important that we.
So the
we try to move
23rd,
Quickly.
we'll come prepared with assessments of if the current new build can be redesigned and reduced. And I'm gonna do some more analysis and we'll work on it, on the true cost. One thing I want to bring up, Mr. Mayor, is that this is why the $1.4 million difference between a renovated DPW and a new build is really, really important. Because that 1.4 million in savings, if we renovated that, would go towards potentially the extra cost that we might incur with the PD. So I don't want to lose sight that this is two-dimensional, right?
Right.
So, thank you.
With all that being said, why don't we get some feedback from our great residents? We have good of the borough. Please stand and identify yourself by clearly stating your name and address for the record. Please try to observe a time limit of 3 minutes. Sure.
Evening, I'm Tara Sapoli. I reside at 35th Street, which is right across from the police station and actually right across from the parking lot. But I have some question, just one question on your DPW discussion, and then I have a few for the police station. In the beginning of your presentation, Drew, I heard you mention drainage, that was a problem, and it essentially cut out one of the bays when there is a drainage problem. I didn't hear drainage mentioned in terms of afterwards, so I was wondering in your consideration of renovation costs, if you were considering drainage
Yes.
remediation. Okay,
Yes.
I didn't see it on the
Stormwater
chart.
management, data quantity, right,
Okay.
how much water there is, and then ensuring the proper stormwater management exists at the site. So
Okay.
yes,
Good enough.
fair, Rich?
Yes.
To the police station. I seem to hear a discussion that the community center should remain part of the police station. But then the discussion got into a new building. That was during the renovation discussion. So what are you considering? Are you considering a police facility attached with the community center attached?
It would be, the way that we've discussed it so far in the initial design plans as they are, it's a separate building. It's set back behind the police station.
Is that not Green Acres property though?
Teresa, what was isn't there a?
Yes.
yeah.
The property from the blue basketball courts back is Green Acres. And the limiting factor in the Green Acres building, if the borough, and we've been down this road before, if the borough wanted to build a building there, it has to be recreation.
So the design, the site plan of that, garage facility and the community room is not on Green Acres property as designed currently.
And it's not being considered right now.
Well, it is. It's being
The
considered.
building's
In
being
fact,
considered not to be on Green Acres property. If I recall, we built it big enough to go up to the line.
Yeah.
It was not, it did not encroach.
And it would approximate the size of the current community meeting from the.
Parking, has parking been addressed? Because I know there are a certain number of spaces, and if you're gonna go to a two-story building, you would probably keep the same amount of spaces, but that, again, as a resident. that
In the
is a
current,
problem.
in the current design plan, yes.
Okay. What else? Oh, I implore you to consider, I remember looking at the architecture's presentation or his design of the buildings. I didn't feel that it was represented, personally, I didn't feel it was representative of Fairhaven. I drive through Rumson, I see their police department, their municipal building, it fits in, it's brick face. The monstrosity that's going up in Middletown, same deal. It fits in with the community that's been established for many years. And I know the trend in town seems to be when a house is built, a new home is built, we get the white, looks like metal with the black roofs. And that's how that design appeared to me. And I'm imploring you to consider having some design changes to the outward structure to blend in better with the community.
Great feedback.
Or something that would make it not quaint, but it's just something that didn't scream garage.
I love your word quaint because that's what I think of when I think of Fairhaven.
Yeah.
Aesthetics is a little bit difficult sometimes because people have a different opinion of what the look of Fairhaven is.
I
But
agree.
I think it's a great point and we appreciate.
It's
you bringing
changed,
it up.
I mean, I understand, I've lived here for over 35 years, I understand the town is changing, we have new properties, we have new ideas. But again, when I compare what was proposed for us, for any of the buildings, against what other similar towns had,
Understood.
I think we'll be laughed at if you keep the current outward structure. That's all, thank you.
Thank you
Thank
so
you,
much.
Terry. Anybody else in the public? Public comment?
Good evening, Wilson Rodriguez, resident of Allen Street. Congrats. to the
Look,
new-
sir, because the residents at home can't hear you, you know, exist.
Come on up.
Okay,
Great.
I'm Chief. Rich, thanks.
We're quaint and cozy.
Russell notes. So, congrats to the new board members, Mr. Mayor, to yourself, congrats. First and foremost, I thank you for continuing to champion these efforts as it's a benefit to the community and to the DBW employees. Specifically, I'm going to talk about the DBW. I've been involved with these discussions since 2016 as a resident regarding the DBW project. Sincerely, I'm disappointed. We have to now act with urgency since this has been going on since 2016. Nonetheless, and I know it doesn't have to be done in phase one, which is right now. I kindly request the council consider the continuous resident engagement and feedback that's been going on since 2018. So essentially for the past 4 years have been provided to help minimize the impact of this industrial building within a residential area. And to the point that the young lady here mentioned regarding the appearance in the building, even back then it was mentioned, just put up a shed or something, no, that's why the designs you've seen have taken 2 years. There have been committees, architects from the town that provided their time and effort, feedback, multiple resident engagements, meetings by the council. In the past 2 years have been very significant. Hopefully all of this is taken into consideration with the design. Particularly, there were 3 concerns with respect to the flow and functionality of the DPW. The increased traffic flow with the recycling area. the side the residents park on when they drop off recycling material is a clear no parking area. Sometimes there's 2 to 3 cars that are parked at a time, impeding the flow of traffic, blocking residential driveways, impeding DPW traffic, truck flow during the time. I don't know if any of you have considered seeing that. We discuss it, we talk about it, but one thing is to see it firsthand. In the past, council members have visited the area and have seen that firsthand. This is a growing liability. That's not going to stop anytime soon. This becomes even more concerning twice a day, Monday through Friday, when 3rd Street is closed for school arrival and departure, when the kids are driving on their bicycles. And I support that. When people start dropping off recycling material on Allen and the streets closed or whatever, now you have this massive U-turn, more chaotic traffic flow going, further adds to the liability. The other two, not as paramount and important as all the resident engagement that we've been providing, was the privacy and the screening and the landscaping. I think somebody else had mentioned that. And the third was community fields park. During the fall, the spring, and the summer, that field, that area is highly utilized. And I'll put it into perspective. T-ball registration last year or 2 years prior was 90 kids. Last year was 125. Granted, the school added another, added full day kindergarten. There's more students. That area will be highly utilized. There is not enough parking right there as it stands. As we go forward with this trend, there will not be parking. If you try driving there when there's games and practice going on, you cannot. The flow does not exist on 3rd Street. That parking lot area in front of the DPW where the grass area was kind of configured, was kind of appropriated to kind of mitigate that effort. Hopefully something like that can be considered. And that's about it. That's all I said. So thank you again for championing this. Hopefully this feedback can be continued to be incorporated with the designs and the iterations of the DPW complex, the project, the building, the area, etc. So thank you.
Wilson, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Very much appreciated. Anybody else have any questions in the public? No? Allison, is there anyone online with their hand up?
Yes. Judy?
You could bring her in. Judy?
It looks like it's different.
Let's take close.
Just have to unmute yourself, Mr. Paul.
Dick, can you unmute your mic?
Hello?
Yes, we got you.
Dick Fuller, 36 Wood Lane. Just one thing I wanted to clarify. There was a discussion about exposure, and I think Councilman Rodriguez made the point that we had a great potential exposure because of our not being in compliance and having issues of that sort. Is it the case that we don't know our exposure, or is that covered by insurance?
Basically, when you put it, I'll defer to Andrew, but as far as exposure goes, if you have a lawsuit or workers' comp suit filed against the borough, there is insurance coverage, but there's also other mitigating factors that go into a final resolution. Is that a fair statement?
Absolutely.
I think ultimately, and did I cut you off?
No.
Okay. Ultimately, it sounds like there's insurance coverage, but we want a safe place for them to work. The coverage at the end of the day is secondary. I think we want to move forward in a quick fashion because we want them working in a safe place. That's the idea.
I suppose I understand. At the same time, I think a major issue is that in these discussions, very rarely do you present the case for the gain to the town. Specifically, what is, let me ask a question this way. Would we be meeting here if we had maintained that facility properly and responded to updates as we became aware of the need? In other words,
Dick, I think that's a great question, and it's a good lesson for us moving forward. I think that's why I got frustrated from the standpoint of, I don't feel as if it's this governing body that's specifically putting the borough in harm's way. But we can learn lessons moving forward, so we don't put ourselves in this position again, by maintaining the roof at the DPW, for instance, by, I don't know what led to the mold issue at the PD. Maybe that was a roofing issue years ago as well.
It was actually a replacement of the heating system that was actually an upgrade that we got from a grant from the state for more energy efficiency.
So it's hard, and it's hard to have that crystal ball to say, whether we would be here or not, but we can certainly use the lessons from this situation so we're not here again in the future.
but we do plan to have rigorous maintenance plans, and you plan to keep abreast of requirements.
Yeah, and a facilities audit.
Will that plan be put in place?
I'm pretty confident, Will. I think a testament to Councilman LaBarbera, with the assistance of, a lot of different people that have helped him to see since January 3rd, what he's done to just put this presentation together. I'm pretty confident that, he's going to be on top of it.
Yeah, I am too.
Dick, to answer that even further, right, you need a maintenance for facilities, a maintenance plan for vehicles, right? And you have to ensure that you're appropriately budgeted to maintain these different items for the town. So you're not in a position where you need a new car, or you're not in a position where you need a new building, right? That's what we'll ultimately get to. Our focus right now is to address DPW PD, get these going, break ground with whatever that means metaphorically for both of them, and then address and turn our attention to those types of initiatives and efforts.
Yeah.
I just want to make the point that my generation obviously is the one that didn't pay. And I think it's extremely important to keep, I don't think perhaps people of this generation will put up to it with it. I hope they don't. In any case, there's one other issue in that regard. I'm used to spending capital money to get something, an improvement of productivity, or let's see. You would either like improvement of productivity so you could get more or it would cost less. Or I'm looking it up, sorry. Yeah, or pay for past mistakes. So those are the two things. And we've committed to paying for past mistakes. We haven't heard anything about productivity. And maybe
if I may comment, I think that the problem is, for good or for bad, the buildings have fallen into disrepair. The DPW, I think we heard the roof may fall on top of an employee, and the police station, from my conversations with the chief, since the mold was found out in 2016, nothing has been done that is of substance to improve that building. It's essentially in the same disrepair condition that it was before. So, I think the proper maintenance has not been done, but it's for a period of, I would say, over 10 years, that there has not been
deferred
done.
maintenance.
Proper maintenance that exceeds
Adds
the
up.
10 years, that has not been done on an annual basis. And has left some employees from some buildings to paint their own bathroom. I think I heard that as being the case, that some employees took it upon themselves to improve conditions of the building by buying their own paint cans. So I think that demonstrates the degree to which, things have been left without being taken care of. So I'm not sure if it would be great if we gain productivity, but it starts with providing a safe, healthy environment for employees where they feel well taken care of. And that in itself increases productivity. So, I think it's been long enough that we if we defer any of these plans we're discussing, we should have a maintenance plan for this year to do something.
No, I'll set that aside. I just want something less abstract.
Yeah.
I really would like something, I really would like something abstract, less abstract, so that we could really point to either having more opportunities. If we have more productivity, we essentially can get more or we can save more.
Are you talking about efficiencies, Mr. Fuller?
Excuse me?
Do you mean efficiencies in some of the technology that we put in place, the design of the building?
Well, I call it productivity,
Okay.
but I think we're talking probably about, in other words, our employees are able to work more. I think maintenance is a factor, but I think if you're talking to a taxpayer like me, I'd like to know what more my taxes can provide. It's not an unreasonable request. I can understand the importance of maintenance. I can understand the importance of keeping up with requirements. But I think that there needs to be a greater discussion about improving opportunities. Very rarely, the recreation building will not provide more, but will at least provide the same that we've had. And that's an example, but I think we need more attention to producing for the residents directly. Thanks.
Understood. Thank you, Derek.
Yeah, thanks. You're welcome.
Allison, is there anyone else with their hand up? No one else with their hand up? Okay, with that being said, do I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? 9:46 PM.